On my wedding day, my father-in-law said I would never amount to anything and felt sorry his daughter had chosen to live with me. I simply accepted it in silence and said, "That's fine. That's your opinion." But when his family businesses entered bankruptcy proceedings, I surprised everyone by buying the companies and his farm in cash. My name is Marcus. It was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. After dating for 3 years and being engaged for another, Isabella Harrison and I were finally getting married in the spring of 2018. The weather had cooperated perfectly, 72 degrees, clear blue skies, and just enough of a breeze to rustle the cherry blossoms that decorated the outdoor venue at the Lakeview Country Club. Isabella looked breathtaking in her ivory gown, delicate lace trailing down her arms to her wrists. When she appeared, at the end of the aisle on her father's arm, my heart nearly stopped. Even through her veil, I could see the radiance in her smile, the anticipation in her eyes. For a brief moment, I forgot about everything else, my nerves, the 200 guests watching, and most importantly, my complicated relationship with Victor Harrison, the man escorting her toward me. Victor Harrison was everything I wasn't: affluent by birth, imposing in stature, and deeply connected in Seattle's agricultural business elite. 3 generations of Harrisons had built one of the largest grain-producing operations in Washington state. Their family name adorned buildings at the local university, and their annual harvest festival was a community tradition. Meanwhile, I was the son of a single mother who had worked 2 jobs to put me through college, where I'd studied agricultural technology and business. Isabella and I had met at a farm tech conference, where I was presenting a new irrigation monitoring system I'd helped develop at Agritech Solutions, the company where I'd been working for the past 6 years. She was there representing her family's business interests, a duty she performed with more enthusiasm than her father or brother ever acknowledged. We connected instantly, and despite her father's barely concealed disapproval, our relationship had flourished. "Who gives this woman to be married?" the minister asked, following the traditional ceremony script Isabella had wanted. "Her mother and I do," Victor answered, his deep voice carrying easily across the gathering. He placed Isabella's hand in mine, but not before giving me a look I'd come to know well over our years of dating, a mixture of assessment and dismissal. I'd seen that same look when I'd first picked Isabella up for dinner, when I'd announced our engagement, at the Harrison family's Thanksgiving dinner, and most recently, when I'd approached him to discuss wedding plans. The ceremony itself was beautiful. We exchanged the vows we'd written together, promising to support each other's dreams, to build a life of purpose and joy, to be partners in all things. When the minister pronounced us husband and wife, Isabella's kiss tasted of tears and laughter, and the applause of our gathered friends and family wrapped around us like an embrace. If only the reception had maintained that warmth. The trouble began, as family troubles often do, with the toasts. Eleanor Harrison, Isabella's mother, spoke first, offering a gentle, heartfelt welcome to me as the newest member of their family. Isabella's brother Richard followed with amusing anecdotes about her childhood determination and stubborn streak, qualities I'd come to adore in her. Then Victor Harrison rose to his feet, champagne flute in hand. A hush fell over the reception hall. At 6'2" with a full head of silver hair and the confident bearing of a man accustomed to being in charge, he commanded attention without effort. "As the father of the bride," he began, his voice warm and charming, "it's traditional for me to say a few words about this momentous occasion." Isabella squeezed my hand under the table. I squeezed back, offering reassurance I wasn't entirely feeling. During our 3 years together, Victor had maintained a polite but unmistakable distance. Any hope that the wedding might soften his attitude was about to be thoroughly crushed. "Isabella," he continued, turning toward his daughter, "you have always been the brightest star in our family constellation. From the time you were a little girl trailing me around the farms, asking endless questions, to your graduation from Stanford with honors, you have made your mother and me immeasurably proud." He paused, taking a sip of champagne, and I noticed Eleanor shifting uncomfortably in her seat. She'd always been kind to me, if somewhat reserved, caught in the impossible position between her husband's disapproval and her daughter's happiness. Intelligence, grace, and determination. These are the Harrison family traits you embody so beautifully, Victor continued, his voice swelling with genuine pride. You were destined for greatness from the moment you were born. Then, his gaze shifted to me, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. And Marcus. The pause that followed my name stretched uncomfortably. You have managed to win the heart of my exceptional daughter. Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. Isabella's grip on my hand tightened. I must admit, Victor continued, swirling his champagne thoughtfully, I never imagined Isabella would choose someone so ordinary for her life partner. The word ordinary hung in the air like a slap. I felt the heat of embarrassment creeping up my neck. To be perfectly honest, he went on, his voice lowered as if sharing a confidence with the room. I'm sorry she's made this choice. I've never seen a promising future for you, young man, but for my daughter's sake, I sincerely hope I'm wrong. Gasps and murmurs spread across the reception hall. Isabella's cousin Catherine, seated at a nearby table, audibly whispered, Did he really just say that? Eleanor's face had gone pale, and Richard was studying the tablecloth with sudden intensity. Isabella half rose from her seat, trembling with anger, but I gently guided her back down. This wasn't the moment for a scene that would be remembered. Longer than our vows, Victor raised his glass higher. To the bride and groom, he concluded flatly, may your future together exceed my expectations. The toast was met with awkward, scattered applause. Some guests lifted their glasses automatically, while others seemed frozen in disbelief. I felt as though I'd been doused in ice water, my chest tight with humiliation and rage. 3 years of subtle put-downs and dismissive comments had crystallized into this public declaration of my unworthiness. Part of me wanted to stand up and defend myself, to throw his words back in his face. Another part wanted to simply walk out with Isabella and never look back. Instead, I did something that surprised even myself. I stood slowly, picked up my own glass, and looked Victor directly in the eyes. Thank you, Mr. Harrison, for those candid remarks, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. And that's your opinion, and you're entitled to it. I turned away from him to address the rest of the guests. To everyone who has supported Isabella and me with genuine good wishes, thank you from the bottom of our hearts. We're looking forward to building our future together, whatever that might hold. I took a sip from my glass, then sat down amidst a new round of applause, warmer this time, with several encouraging nods from guests who seemed relieved that someone had broken the tension. Isabella pressed her forehead against my shoulder for a moment. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I should have expected something like this from him. It's not your fault, I replied quietly. Besides, the only opinion about me that matters is yours. The band began playing, signaling the start of our first dance, a welcome distraction from the lingering discomfort. As we moved across the dance floor, I tried to focus on Isabella, on the way her eyes shone up at me, on the small smile that told me how proud she was of my restraint. But Victor's words had lodged themselves deep inside me. Never seen. A promising future for you. The phrase echoed with each step, each turn. The rest of the reception passed in a blur of cake cutting, more dancing, and conversations with well-wishers who seemed determined to compensate for Victor's rudeness with excessive enthusiasm about our future together. James Mercer, my boss at Agritech Solutions, caught me alone by the bar later in the evening. That was quite a performance from your father-in-law, he said, ordering us both a scotch. Not entirely unexpected, I admitted, accepting the drink gratefully. James was in his late 50s, with salt and pepper hair and the weathered face of someone who'd spent years outdoors before moving into the executive suite. Unlike most of the other executives at Agritech, he'd started from the ground up, a working harvest cruise in his youth before putting himself through college. He'd taken a special interest in my career since hiring me 6 years ago. You handled it with remarkable grace, he said, studying me over his glass. Most men would have lost their temper or slunk away in shame. You did neither, I shrugged. Making a scene wouldn't have accomplished anything except ruining Isabella's wedding day, even more than her father already had. That kind of composure under pressure is rare, James noted. It's one of the reasons I've been considering you for the new division we're planning. This caught my attention. New division? He nodded. On my wedding day, my father-in-law said I would never amount to anything and felt sorry his daughter had chosen to live with me. I simply accepted it in silence and said, "That's fine, that's your opinion." But when his family businesses entered bankruptcy proceedings, I surprised everyone by buying the companies and his farm in cash. My name is Marcus. It was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. After dating for 3 years and being engaged for another, Isabella Harrison and I were finally getting married in the spring of 2018. The weather had cooperated perfectly, 72 degrees, clear blue skies, and just enough of a breeze to rustle the cherry blossoms that decorated the outdoor venue at the Lakeview Country Club. Isabella looked breathtaking in her ivory gown, delicate lace trailing down her arms to her wrists. When she appeared, at the end of the aisle on her father's arm, my heart nearly stopped. Even through her veil, I could see the radiance in her smile, the anticipation in her eyes. For a brief moment, I forgot about everything else. My nerves, the 200 guests watching, and most importantly, my complicated relationship with Victor Harrison, the man escorting her toward me. Victor Harrison was everything I wasn't, affluent by birth, imposing in stature, and deeply connected in Seattle's agricultural business elite. 3 generations of Harrisons had built one of the largest grain-producing operations in Washington state. Their family name adorned buildings at the local university, and their annual harvest festival was a community tradition. Meanwhile, I was the son of a single mother who had worked 2 jobs to put me through college, where I'd studied agricultural technology and business. Isabella and I had met at a farm tech conference where I was presenting a new irrigation monitoring system I'd helped develop at Agritech Solutions, the company where I'd been working for the past 6 years. She was there representing her family's business interests, a duty she performed with more enthusiasm than her father or brother ever acknowledged. We connected instantly, and despite her father's barely concealed disapproval, our relationship had flourished. "Oh, who gives this woman to be married?" the minister asked, following the traditional ceremony script Isabella had wanted. "Her mother and I do," Victor answered, his deep voice carrying easily across the gathering. He placed Isabella's hand in mine, but not before giving me a look I'd come to know well over our years of dating, a mixture of assessment and dismissal. I'd seen that same look when I'd first picked Isabella up for dinner, when I'd announced our engagement, at the Harrison family's Thanksgiving dinner, and most recently, when I'd approached him to discuss wedding plans. The ceremony itself was beautiful. We exchanged the vows we'd written together, promising to support each other's dreams, to build a life of purpose and joy, to be partners in all things. When the minister pronounced us husband and wife, Isabella's kiss tasted of tears and laughter, and the applause of our gathered friends and family wrapped around us like an embrace. If only the reception had maintained that warmth. The trouble began, as family troubles often do, with the toasts. Eleanor Harrison, Isabella's mother, spoke first, offering a gentle, heartfelt welcome to me as the newest member of their family. Isabella's brother Richard followed with amusing anecdotes about her childhood determination and stubborn streak, qualities I'd come to adore in her. Then Victor Harrison rose to his feet, champagne flute in hand. A hush fell over the reception hall. At 6'2" with a full head of silver hair and the confident bearing of a man accustomed to being in charge, he commanded attention without effort. As the father of the bride, he began, his voice warm and charming. "It's traditional for me to say a few words about this momentous occasion." Isabella squeezed my hand under the table. I squeezed back, offering reassurance I wasn't entirely feeling. During our 3 years together, Victor had maintained a polite but unmistakable distance. Any hope that the wedding might soften his attitude was about to be thoroughly crushed. "Isabella," he continued, turning toward His daughter. You have always been the brightest star in our family constellation. From the time you were a little girl trailing me around the farms, asking endless questions, to your graduation from Stanford with honors, you have made your mother and me immeasurably proud. He paused, taking a sip of champagne, and I noticed Eleanor shifting uncomfortably in her seat. She'd always been kind to me, if somewhat reserved, caught in the impossible position between her husband's disapproval and her daughter's happiness. Intelligence, grace, and determination. These are the Harrison family traits you embody so beautifully, Victor continued, his voice swelling with genuine pride. You were destined for greatness from the moment you were born. Then, his gaze shifted to me, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. And Marcus. The pause that followed my name stretched uncomfortably. You have managed to win the heart of my exceptional daughter. Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. Isabella's grip on my hand tightened. I must admit, Victor continued, swirling his champagne thoughtfully, I never imagined Isabella would choose someone so ordinary for her life partner. The word ordinary hung in the air like a slap. I felt the heat of embarrassment creeping up my neck. To be perfectly honest, he went on, his voice lowered as if sharing a confidence with the room, I'm sorry she's made this choice. I've never seen a promising future for you, young man, but for my daughter's sake, I sincerely hope I'm wrong. Gasps and murmurs spread across the reception hall. Isabella's cousin Catherine, seated at a nearby table, audibly whispered, Did he really just say that? Eleanor's face had gone pale, and Richard was studying the tablecloth with sudden intensity. Isabella half rose from her seat, trembling with anger, but I gently guided her back down. This wasn't the moment for a scene that would be remembered, longer than our vows. Victor raised his glass higher. To the bride and groom, he concluded flatly. May your future together exceed my expectations. The toast was met with awkward, scattered applause. Some guests lifted their glasses automatically, while others seemed frozen in disbelief. I felt as though I'd been doused in ice water, my chest tight with humiliation and rage. 3 years of subtle put-downs and dismissive comments had crystallized into this public declaration of my unworthiness. Part of me wanted to stand up and defend myself, to throw his words back in his face. Another part wanted to simply walk out with Isabella and never look back. Instead, I did something that surprised even myself. I stood slowly, picked up my own glass, and looked Victor directly in the eyes. Thank you, Mr. Harrison, for those candid remarks, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. And that's your opinion, and you're entitled to it. I turned away from him to address the rest of the guests. To everyone who has supported Isabella and me with genuine good wishes, thank you from the bottom of our hearts. We're looking forward to building our future together, whatever that might hold. I took a sip from my glass, then sat down amidst a new round of applause, warmer this time, with several encouraging nods from guests who seemed relieved that someone had broken the tension. Isabella pressed her forehead against my shoulder for a moment. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I should have expected something like this from him. It's not your fault, I replied quietly. Besides, the only opinion about me that matters is yours. The band began playing, signaling the start of our first dance, a welcome distraction from the lingering discomfort. As we moved across the dance floor, I tried to focus on Isabella, on the way her eyes shone up at me, on the small smile that told me how proud she was of my restraint. But Victor's words had lodged themselves deep inside me. Never seen a promising future for you. The phrase echoed with each step, each turn. The rest of the reception passed in a blur of cake cutting, more dancing, and conversations with well-wishers who seemed determined to compensate for Victor's rudeness with excessive enthusiasm about our future together. James Mercer, my boss at Agritech Solutions, caught me alone by the bar later in the evening. That was quite a performance from your father-in-law, he said, ordering us both a scotch. Not entirely unexpected, I admitted, accepting the drink gratefully. Oh, James was in his late 50s, with salt and pepper hair and the weathered face of someone who'd spent years outdoors before moving into the executive suite. Unlike most of the other executives at Agritech, he'd started from the ground up, working harvest crews in his youth before putting himself through college. He'd taken a special interest in my career since hiring me 6 years ago. "You handled it with remarkable grace," he said, studying me over his glass. "Most men would have lost their temper or slunk away in shame. You did neither." I shrugged. Making a scene wouldn't have accomplished anything except ruining Isabella's wedding day, even more than her father already had. "That kind of composure under pressure is rare," James noted. "It's one of the reasons I've been considering you for the new division we're planning." This caught my attention. "New division?" He nodded. "And we'd need to be careful with expenses across the board." Isabella gathered her long dark hair into a ponytail, a habit she had when concentrating. With her Stanford MBA, she understood the financial implications better than most. "I've been thinking about that. What if I joined the company too?" The suggestion caught me off guard. "You'd leave your position at Westland Marketing." "They're going through another reorganization anyway," she shrugged. "And I've been wanting to do something more meaningful than creating advertising. Campaigns for luxury condos." Isabella's marketing expertise would be invaluable to the new venture, but I hesitated. Working together, being married, that's a lot of togetherness. Some couples can't handle it. She moved the spreadsheets aside and took my hands. "We're not some couples, we're us. And I believe in this, Marcus. I believe in you." The sincerity in her eyes sealed the decision. 2 days later, we signed the partnership agreement. James would retain 70% ownership, I would have 15%, and the remaining 15% was reserved for future team members, including Isabella, who would join as marketing director in 3 months after transitioning from her current job. The next Sunday, we were expected at the Harrisons' Royson for their traditional monthly family dinner. It would be our first encounter with Victor since the wedding, and my stomach churned with anxiety as we drove through the imposing gates that marked the entrance to the Harrison estate. The sprawling colonial-style mansion sat amid 20 acres of manicured grounds, a testament to 3 generations of agricultural success. "Remember, it's just dinner," Isabella said as we pulled into the circular driveway. 2 hours max and we're out." Eleanor greeted us at the door with warm hugs and ushered us into the formal living room where Richard was already nursing a scotch. Now 34, Richard had followed dutifully in his father's footsteps, managing the operational aspects of the Harrison farms while Victor handled the business side. Unlike his father, Richard had always been cordial to me, if somewhat distant. "The newlyweds return," he said, raising his glass in greeting. "How was Cape Cod?" "Lovely," Isabella replied. "Just what we needed." Victor entered the room, commanding attention without effort. "Isabella," he acknowledged with a nod, then barely glanced at me. "Marcus." Dinner was served in the formal dining room, where generations of Harrisons smiled down from portrait paintings. The conversation remained superficial. Weather forecasts, community gossip, Richard's recent business trip to Portland. Eleanor made valiant efforts to include me in the discussion, asking about my work at Agritech. "Actually," I said, seizing an opening, "I have some news. I've been offered a partnership in a new division focusing on technology. Solutions for medium-sized farms." Eleanor's face lit up. "And that's wonderful, isn't it, Victor?" Victor meticulously cut a piece of roast beef. "Partnership," he repeated, the word hanging in the air. "Minority stake, I assume." 15% to start, I confirmed, determined not to let his tone diminish my achievement. "That's significant," Richard commented, seeming genuinely impressed. Victor set down his knife and fork. "And the capital requirement?" "That we've worked it out," Isabella interjected before I could answer, her tone making it clear the subject wasn't open for discussion. "I see," Victor replied, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Well, I hope this venture proves worthwhile. The agricultural technology sector is notoriously fickle. Today's innovation is tomorrow's obsolescence. That's precisely why our approach is different, I explained, resolved to maintain my composure. We're focusing on integrated solutions that can evolve with the farm's needs, not just selling hardware that becomes outdated. Victor's dismissive wave cut me off. Yes, very forward-thinking, I'm sure. The conversation moved on, but the tone had been set. By the time dessert was served, Isabella was gripping my hand under the table so tightly her knuckles had gone white. In the car afterward, she exploded. He didn't even try, not even a pretense of being happy for us. It doesn't matter, I said, though the sting of his dismissal lingered. We know what we're building. We don't need his approval. Isabella leaned back against the headrest, closing her eyes. It's not about approval. It's about basic respect. Something he seems incapable of showing you. Over the next 6 months, AgriSmart grew from concept to reality. We leased modest office space in South Seattle, assembled a small but talented team, and developed our first integrated farm management system. Days blurred into nights as we worked relentlessly, fueled by a shared vision and the desperation that comes with having everything on the line. Our first major client came through a connection from James, the Wilkinson family farm, 800 acres of mixed crops in eastern Washington. Third-generation farmers struggling with drought conditions and rising costs. They represented exactly the type of operation we aimed to help. I spent 2 weeks on their property, meticulously mapping irrigation systems, soil conditions, and operational workflows. The personalized approach paid off. When we presented our solution, a custom combination of soil moisture sensors, automated irrigation controls, and yield prediction software, Tom Wilkinson, the family patriarch, leaned back in his chair and smiled for the first time since we'd met. "You know something, son," he said, studying me over his reading glasses. "You talk like someone who's actually walked a field before, not just read about it in some textbook." It was the highest compliment he could have given, and it validated our approach. The Wilkinsons signed a 3-year contract, becoming our proof of concept. By the end of our first year, word had spread, and we'd added 7 more farms to our client roster. The work was exhausting but deeply satisfying. Each farm presented unique challenges, and our solutions evolved with every implementation. Isabella's marketing strategy focused on personal stories, farmers sharing real results with their peers, rather than glossy brochures or technical specifications. One evening, as we celebrated our 1-year anniversary both as a couple and as business partners, Isabella raised her wine glass. "To proving them wrong," she toasted. "Them?" I asked, though I suspected I knew who she meant. "The doubters," she clarified. "My father, those investors who turned James down, everyone who said medium-sized farms were doomed to corporate takeover." I clinked my glass against hers. "It's too early to declare victory, but we're certainly on the right track." She studied me across the table of the small Italian restaurant where we'd had our first date. "You've changed this past year," she observed. "There's a confidence in you that wasn't there before." Had I changed? Perhaps. Success, even modest initial success, had a way of reinforcing belief in oneself. But there was something else, too, a quiet determination that had taken root the night of our wedding, when Victor's words had cut so deeply. "I'm just growing into who I always could be," I replied. "Having you beside me makes all the difference." As our second year began, we faced our first significant setback. A particularly harsh winter damaged some of our in-field equipment, requiring costly replacements that weren't covered by our maintenance agreements. The incident exposed a gap in our business model and strained our already tight cash reserves. "We need to revise the contract language," James advised during an emergency meeting, "and establish a contingency fund for environmental incidents." The solution was straightforward, but implementation required additional capital. We'd need to reinvest all our profits from the first year and secure a line of credit to cover the shortfall. "It's the right move strategically," Isabella agreed when we discussed it at home, "but it means another year of financial strain for us personally." Our modest apartment, once a temporary stopping point on the way to a proper house, had become our long-term residence by necessity. The furniture was showing wear, the kitchen needed updating, and space was increasingly limited as our home office expanded to accommodate our growing workload. Just one more year, I promised, though we both knew business projections were never that neat and tidy. Once we're through this growth phase, Isabella silenced me with a kiss. I'm not complaining, Marcus. This is our dream, and we're building it together. I just want to make sure we're making conscious choices, not just reacting to circumstances. Her wisdom grounded me as always. That night, as she slept beside me, I found myself thinking about the choices that had led us here, the risks taken, the sacrifices made, the priorities chosen. We had deliberately postponed buying a house, starting a family, even taking proper vacations, all in service of building something meaningful. Would it be worth it? Victor's voice sometimes whispered doubts in my quieter moments. Never. Seen a promising future for you. But increasingly, those whispers were drowned out by the evidence of our growing success. By our second anniversary, AgriSmart had expanded to 18 client farms across Washington, Oregon, and Idaho. Our team had grown to 15 full-time employees, and we'd moved to larger offices in a converted warehouse space. More significantly, our integrated approach was showing measurable results. Client farms reported water usage reduced by 30%, yield increases averaging 22%, and operational cost savings between 15 to 20%. These weren't just statistics. They represented real impact on real families. The Wilkinsons had been able to bring their oldest son back to the family business, reversing his planned move to Seattle for corporate work. The Hendersons had finally turned a profit after 3 consecutive loss years. The Schmidts had expanded their operation, purchasing neighboring land that had been at risk of development. And this is why we do it, James said one evening as we reviewed these success stories. Not just for the bottom line, but for the continuation of a way of life that matters. The monthly dinners at the Harrison estate continued, though the dynamic had shifted subtly. Victor still regarded me with skepticism, but it was tempered now by grudging acknowledgement of AgriSmart's modest success. Richard had become more engaged, occasionally asking technical questions about our irrigation systems, his area of responsibility at the Harrison farms. There's an article about you in the Seattle Business Journal, Eleanor mentioned during one such dinner, approximately 2.5 years after our wedding. A profile of emerging agricultural technology companies. It was quite flattering. I saw it, Victor commented, surprising us all. Interesting approach, focusing on the middle market. Limited scalability, though. It was the closest thing to a compliment he'd ever offered, and I chose to take it as such. Actually, our model is designed for scalability, I explained, outlining how our systems could be adapted for operations of various sizes. For once, Victor actually listened, asking pointed but not dismissive questions. As Isabella and I drove home that night, she seemed thoughtful. He's starting to see it, she said finally. Not fully, not willingly, but he's starting to understand that what you're building has real value. I don't need his validation, I reminded her, though the evening's civil exchange had admittedly felt like progress. I know you don't, she replied, but I want him to eat his words someday. Completely and utterly. Her fierce loyalty warmed me, even as I wondered if such complete vindication was possible, or even necessary. We were building something successful, regardless of Victor's opinion. Shortly after our 3rd anniversary, James proposed a significant expansion of our business model. Until now, we'd been primarily providing technology solutions and consulting services to existing farms. His new vision would take us into direct ownership and operation. AgriFund, he announced, spreading documents across the conference table during a private meeting with Isabella and me. A division that acquires underperforming agricultural properties, implements our technologies, improves operations, and either sells the revitalized farms at a profit or maintains them in our portfolio. The concept was ambitious. Moving from service providers to owners and operators would require substantial capital investment and an entirely new set of skills and personnel. Initial capitalization of $10 million, James continued. I can secure $7 million from investors. The remaining $3 million would come from AgriSmart's retained earnings and additional investment from current partners. I did the quick math. My share would be approximately $450,000, 3 times my initial investment, and far more than our personal savings could cover, even after 3 years of disciplined living and reinvestment. We'd need financing, I said quietly, glancing at Isabella. James nodded. Yes, but the projections justify it. Look at the 5-year return estimates. The numbers were compelling. An anticipated 85% return on investment within the first 3 years, based on the acquisition and transformation of just 3 to 5 properties annually. Which properties would we target? Isabella asked, ever practical. Undervalued, distressed, or mismanaged operations in prime. Agricultural regions, James explained. Farms where the land itself is excellent, but outdated practices, succession problems, or financial mismanagement have created vulnerability. A specific type of property immediately came to mind, though I didn't voice it. Operations. Like the Harrison farms, if they ever faced difficulties. The thought was fleeting but undeniable. We need time to consider this, I told James. It's a significant shift in our business model and a substantial personal financial commitment. He understood completely. Take a week, review the projections, discuss it privately. This isn't a decision to rush. That night, Isabella and I sat on the small balcony of our apartment. The proposal document spread between us as the city lights twinkled below. After 3 years of partnership, we had developed a comfortable rhythm to these discussions. She focused on market strategy and projections, I on operational feasibility and implementation challenges. The concept is sound, she concluded after a thorough review. Acquisition of underperforming properties has been a proven model in real estate for decades. Applying it to agricultural land with our technological edge could be tremendously successful. But the risk is substantial, I countered. We'd be taking on debt at a level we've never contemplated before, personally and professionally. Isabella leaned back in her chair, studying me. What's really bothering you about this, Marcus? Is it just the financial risk? She knew me too well. After a moment, I admitted, I'm concerned about how this changes our position in the market. Right now, we're partners to farmers, helping them succeed. This model potentially puts us in an adversarial position, capitalizing on their failures, or providing an honorable exit for aging farmers with no succession plan, she suggested. Preventing corporate conglomerates from swallowing. Family operations, maintaining the land's agricultural use rather than seeing it developed into housing tracts. Her reframing helped, as it often did. You're right. It's all in how we approach it. If we maintain our values, actually, improving the operations, being fair in our acquisitions, prioritizing the land's long-term health. Exactly, she agreed. We could be the good guys in this story, preserving agricultural land by making it viable again. By the time we went to bed, we were leaning toward accepting James's proposal, though several questions remained about implementation and our personal financial exposure. The following Saturday, an unexpected development shifted our perspective considerably. Richard called Isabella, something he rarely did outside of family matters. Can I meet you both for coffee? He asked, his voice tense. There's something I need to discuss, privately. We agreed to meet at a small cafe in a neighborhood far from both our apartment and the Harrison estate. When Richard arrived, the strain on his face was immediately apparent. Always fit from his active role in farm operations, he now looked haggard, with dark circles under his eyes and a nervous energy as he slid into the booth across from us. Thanks for meeting me, he said, glancing around as if worried about being overheard. This isn't easy for me. Isabella reached across the table to touch his hand. What's wrong, Rich? Is it Mom? Dad? He shook his head. It's the farms. We're in trouble. Izzy. Serious trouble. Over the next hour, Richard outlined a situation far worse than either of us had imagined. The Harrison Farming Enterprises, 3 large properties totaling over 4,000 acres, were facing a financial crisis that had been building for years and was now approaching a breaking point. Dad refused to modernize, Richard explained, running a hand through his hair in frustration. While other operations were adopting new technologies, he stuck with methods that worked 30 years ago. Our costs kept rising, yields stayed flat or declined, and margins disappeared. But the Harrison farms have always been profitable. Isabella objected. Dad talks about record harvests every year. He talks, Richard emphasized. Reality is different. We haven't had a truly profitable year in nearly 5 years. We've been operating on reserves and loans, and those are running out. The revelation stunned us both. Victor Harrison, who had dismissed my future prospects so confidently, was presiding over the decline of his own agricultural empire. "How bad is it?" I asked quietly. Richard's expression was grim. "Without significant changes or capital infusion, we're looking at bankruptcy within 6 months. Maybe less." "Does Dad know you're talking to us?" Isabella asked. "No, he'd be furious," Richard admitted. "But I'm desperate, Izzy. I've tried everything to convince him to modernize it, to accept help, to acknowledge reality. He won't listen. His pride is going to cost us everything our grandparents and great-grandparents built." The irony wasn't lost on any of us. Victor's stubborn adherence to tradition was destroying the very legacy he claimed to protect. "What are you asking?" "Say exactly," I questioned, already suspecting the answer. Richard looked directly at me. "I've seen what your systems have done for other farms. The Wilkinsons were on the brink 3 years ago, and now they're thriving. I want that. For us, I want you to approach Dad with a proposal." The request put us in an impossible position. Based on everything I knew about Victor Harrison, he would rather lose his farms entirely than accept help from the son-in-law he had publicly deemed inadequate. "Rich," Isabella said gently, "you know Dad would never accept our help. It would be a blow to his pride he couldn't bear." "Then what am I supposed to do?" Richard demanded, a rare flash of anger breaking through his usually controlled demeanor. "Watch it all collapse? Let 3 generations of work disappear?" We sat in uncomfortable silence, the weight of the situation settling around us. Finally, I spoke. "There might be another option," I said carefully, "one that wouldn't require your father to accept help directly from me." Both Harrison siblings looked at me with questions in their eyes. "James and I are considering a new venture, a fund that acquires underperforming agricultural properties, implements modern technology and management practices, and restores them to profitability." Richard caught on immediately. "You would buy the farms?" "The fund would," I clarified. "If they go to bankruptcy or forced sale, we could potentially acquire them, implement our systems, and preserve their agricultural use. You could even stay involved in operations if you wanted. And Dad would never have to accept charity from you," Isabella added, understanding my reasoning. "It would be a straightforward business transaction." Richard considered this, conflict evident on his face. He'd still lose control. The Harrison name would no longer be on the deeds. "True," I acknowledged, "but the land would remain farmland, not be converted to housing developments or shopping centers, and your family legacy, in terms of the agricultural tradition, could continue." "I need to think about this," Richard said finally. "It feels like betrayal, even discussing it. But if the alternative is losing everything..." As we parted ways, Richard made us promise to keep our conversation confidential. "Dad doesn't know how bad things really are," he explained. "Or at least, he won't admit it. I'm still trying to make him see reason." During the drive home, Isabella was uncharacteristically quiet, gazing out the passenger window at the passing scenery. "What are you thinking?" I finally asked. She turned to me, her expression troubled. "I'm thinking about how quickly things can change, how pride can blind someone to reality until it's too late, and I'm wondering if we're at a moral crossroads," she admitted. "Using my family's misfortune as our first acquisition target feels complicated." I reached for her hand. "We don't have to do this. If it feels wrong, we can tell. James, we're not interested in the agri-fund concept. She shook her head. That's not what I'm saying. The concept is sound, and it could do a lot of good. I'm just trying to sort through my feelings about potentially being on the other side of the table from my own father. For what it's worth, I offered, I see this as possibly saving something important to your family, not capitalizing on their misfortune. She squeezed my hand. I know, and that matters. I just need some time to process all this. That night, as we lay in bed, Isabella curled against my side. She whispered, "You know the strangest part of all this. I keep thinking about what Dad said at our wedding, about you having no future. And now he's the one facing that reality, while you're in a position to potentially save what he built." The observation lingered in my mind long after she had fallen asleep. There was a certain poetic justice to the situation, though I took no pleasure in the Harrison Farms' difficulties. Yet I couldn't deny that part of me, a small, perhaps less noble part, felt a certain vindication at the thought of acquiring the very properties whose owner had once deemed me unworthy. The next morning, I called James and told him we were interested in proceeding with the agri-fund concept, with one condition: absolute discretion regarding our potential interest in the Harrison properties. If we decided to pursue them, it would be through proper channels as with appropriate intermediaries, and without using our family connection as leverage. Understood, James agreed. This is strictly business, not personal. But as I hung up the phone, I wondered if such a clean separation was truly possible. Business and personal had been intertwined from the moment Victor Harrison had stood at our wedding reception and declared I had no promising future. Now, the future was unfolding in ways none of us could have predicted. The seeds planted that painful night were growing into something unexpected, an opportunity to prove my worth not through words, but through actions that might ultimately save the very legacy Victor had deemed me unworthy to touch. The question was, could I approach this as the businessman I'd become, focused on sound investments and agricultural preservation? Or would the wounded son-in-law within me influence decisions that should be made dispassionately? As I glanced at a framed photo of Isabella and me on our wedding day, her radiant smile, my cautious happiness, the future stretching unknown before us, I made a silent promise to myself. Whatever came next, I would act with integrity, guided by what was best for the land, the business and my marriage. Not by the desire to prove Victor Harrison wrong, satisfying as that might be. Whether I could keep that promise remained to be seen. The revelation about the Harrison Farms' financial troubles haunted me in the weeks that followed. Each morning as I dressed for work, each evening as Isabella and I discussed the day's developments, the knowledge sat heavily in the back of my mind. It wasn't just the business opportunity. It was the strange, unexpected shift in dynamics between my father-in-law and me. For 3 years, Victor Harrison had been the immovable object in my life, wealthy, established, dismissive of my prospects. Now his empire was crumbling, while the business I had helped build was flourishing. The irony wasn't lost on me, nor was the moral complexity of potentially profiting from his downfall. "You're distracted again," Isabella observed one evening as we sat at our small dining table. She'd prepared her grandmother's lasagna recipe, normally one of my favorites, but I'd barely touched it. "Sorry," I sighed, setting down my fork. "Just thinking about the agri-fund launch. There's so much to coordinate." It wasn't entirely a lie. James and I had spent the past 2 weeks laying the groundwork for the new venture, meeting with potential investors, consulting with agricultural land appraisers, drafting acquisition criteria. But that wasn't what had stolen my appetite. Isabella studied me with the perceptive gaze that had first drawn me to her years ago. "It's not just the launch," she said softly. "It's my family's farms, isn't it?" I nodded, giving up the pretense. I can't stop thinking about it. The timing, the opportunity, the complications. "Have you decided what you're going to do?" "Not yet. Part of me thinks we should stay as far away from the Harrison properties as possible, avoid any appearance of taking advantage of family connections or personal grudges." She took a sip of her wine. And the other part? I met her eyes. The other part recognizes that they're exactly the type of properties AgriFund is designed to acquire and revitalize. Good land, poor management, financial distress. From a purely business perspective, they're ideal candidates. Isabella set down her glass and leaned forward. Can I ask you something uncomfortable? Of course. If these weren't my family's farms, if they belonged to strangers, would you hesitate at all? The question cut straight to the heart of my conflict. No, I admitted after a moment. I wouldn't. We'd be evaluating them purely on their merits as potential acquisitions. Then why are we treating them differently? Because of my father's history with you? Or because you're worried about how it would affect me? Both, I acknowledged. Your father would see it as the ultimate vindication of his judgment, his unwanted son-in-law swooping in to claim his legacy. And I worry about putting you in the middle of that conflict. Isabella was quiet for a long moment, absently twirling her wedding ring, a simple diamond solitaire that we'd chosen together, rather than accepting her grandmother's more ostentatious heirloom ring as Victor had expected. You know, she finally said, growing up as Victor Harrison's daughter meant living with certain expectations. Perfect grades, perfect appearance, perfect behavior. The Harrison name meant something in this community, and I wasn't allowed to forget it. This was a side of her upbringing she rarely discussed, and I listened intently as she continued. When I decided to major in marketing instead of agricultural business, Dad didn't speak to me for 2 weeks. When I took that job at Westland instead of coming to work for Harrison Farms after graduation, he told everyone it was just a phase before I came to my senses. She looked up at me, her expression resolute. I've spent my entire life being defined by my relationship to the Harrison legacy. First as the dutiful daughter, then as the rebellious disappointment, now as the one who married down, as my Aunt Caroline so tactfully put it at our wedding. I winced at the reminder. Caroline's whispered comment had been just audible as we'd passed her table during our reception. My point, Isabella continued, is that I'm tired of making decisions based on how they'll affect my father's ego or the Harrison family name. If AgriFund wants to evaluate the Harrison properties as potential acquisitions, I think it should, based solely on their business merits, not our personal history. Her clarity stunned me. Are you sure? This could permanently damage your relationship with your father. A sad smile crossed her face. What relationship? Marcus, the one where he tolerates my husband at monthly dinners while making subtle digs about his prospects? The one where he dismisses my career choices because they don't align with his vision for me? She shook her head. I love my father, but I stopped expecting his approval a long time ago. I reached across the table to take her hand. I don't want to be the reason for a permanent rift in your family. You wouldn't be, she assured me. If there's a rift, it's one my father created through years of rigid expectations and conditional love. She squeezed my hand. I'm not saying we should target his farms out of spite. I'm saying we shouldn't avoid them out of fear. Evaluate them like any other potential acquisition, and if they make business sense, proceed accordingly. Her permission, no, her encouragement, lifted a weight I hadn't fully acknowledged. Still, I hesitated. There's one more complication, I admitted. Richard. What about him? He came to us in confidence, revealing information about the family business that Victor has been concealing. If we move forward with an acquisition, it could appear that we used that inside information improperly. Isabella considered this. That's a fair point. How would you handle it if this were any other potential acquisition where you had received similar information from an insider? We'd establish a clean information barrier, I explained. Document exactly what was disclosed to us, when, and by whom. Then we'd ensure that our formal evaluation was based solely on publicly available information and standard due diligence. We'd disclose the prior contact in any formal offer to protect all parties legally. Then do exactly that, she said decisively. Treat this like any other business situation. Be ethical, be transparent, but don't handicap yourself out of some misplaced sense of family obligation. I marveled at her clarity. While I'd been agonizing over the personal implications, she had cut straight to the principles that should guide our decision. "When did you get so wise about business ethics?" I asked with a small smile. "Stanford MBA, remember? Plus, I've had a lifetime of watching how power, money, and family can become unhealthily intertwined." She stood and began clearing our plates. "Just promise me one thing. Anything. Whatever happens with the farms, we make decisions. We can live with morally. No shortcuts, no revenge motives, no using this to prove something to my father. Just sound business judgment and respect for the land." "I promise," I said, meaning it completely. The next morning, I called James and outlined our approach. We would include the Harrison properties in our initial evaluation pool for AgriFund, but we would implement strict protocols to ensure there was no improper use of Richard's disclosures. Furthermore, we would not receive any special treatment or consideration based on family connections. "Fair enough," James agreed. "Though you realize Victor will see this as a personal attack regardless of how professionally we handle it." "I know, but we can't make business decisions based on Victor's reactions." "Spoken like a true businessman," James chuckled. "You've come a long way from that nervous young man who first joined my team." That afternoon, I met Richard at a coffee shop halfway between our office and the Harrison Farms headquarters. He looked even more strained than during our previous meeting, with new worry lines creasing his forehead. "Things have gotten worse," he said without preamble, sliding into the booth across from me. "Dad fired our CFO yesterday for suggesting we consider Chapter 11 reorganization. That seems counterproductive," I observed carefully. Richard gave a bitter laugh. "That's my father. Would rather shoot the messenger than hear bad news." He rubbed his temples. "We've got maybe 4 months of operating capital left at current burn rates. After that, we'll default on our equipment loans, then the property mortgages." "I'm sorry, Richard. Truly," he shrugged, a gesture of helplessness rather than indifference. "I've been thinking about what you said, about AgriFund potentially acquiring the properties if they go to bankruptcy or forced sale. And I want to know more about how that would work. What would happen to the farms, to the employees?" When I outlined the basic AgriFund model, we would acquire distressed properties, implement our integrated technology solutions, optimize operations for sustainability and profitability, then either maintain them in our portfolio or sell them to operators committed to maintaining their agricultural use. "And my role in all this?" Richard asked directly. "That would depend on several factors," I answered honestly. "Our standard approach would be to evaluate existing management on their merits. In your case, your operational knowledge would be valuable, but we'd need to discuss your willingness to adopt new methods and technologies." Richard nodded slowly, considering this. "And my father?" The question I'd been dreading. AgriFund typically retains former owners as consultants during a transition period, if they're amenable. Given the personal dynamics in this case, that might be challenging. "That's an understatement," Richard snorted. "He'd rather burn the place down than see you running it. Which is why we need to be extremely careful about how we proceed," I emphasized. "If AgriFund decides to pursue the Harrison properties, and that's still an if, it would need to be through proper channels, with full transparency, and without any appearance of using family connections improperly." Richard studied me for a long moment. "You've really thought this through, haven't you? This isn't just about getting back at Dad for what he said at your wedding." I met his gaze steadily. "It can't be about that. Not if I want to look myself in the mirror every morning." Something in my answer seemed to satisfy him. He nodded and stood up. "I should get back before I'm missed. Just keep me informed, okay? And Marcus?" "Yes. Whatever happens, thank you for caring about the farms themselves. They're more than just assets to me." "I know," I assured him, "and I respect that." As Richard left, I considered how much had changed between us. 3 years ago, he had been the slightly aloof brother-in-law, polite but distant, clearly influenced by his father's assessment of me. Now, he was potentially entrusting me with his family's legacy, The responsibility weighed heavily. Over the next several weeks, AgriFund's launch proceeded according to plan. We secured our initial capitalization of $10 million, $7 million from external investors, and $3 million from AgriSmart principals, including my personal contribution of $450,000, funded partially through a home equity line of credit on the modest house Isabella and I had finally purchased the previous year. As promised, the Harrison properties were included in our initial evaluation pool of 15 distressed agricultural operations across Washington, Oregon, and Idaho. Our analysis team, unaware of my personal connection to the Harrisons, assessed each property using consistent criteria: land quality, water rights, existing infrastructure, potential productivity improvements, and acquisition costs versus projected returns. 2 weeks into the evaluation process, our lead analyst, Sarah Chen, presented the preliminary findings. Based on our criteria, we've narrowed the initial acquisition targets to 5 properties, she explained, distributing folders to James and me. These represent the best combination of value, improvement potential, and strategic fit for our portfolio. I opened my folder with a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. The Harrison properties were listed as the second highest priority acquisition target. The Harrison Farming Enterprises, Sarah continued, pulling up slides on the conference room screen. 3 contiguous properties totaling 4,320 acres in prime growing country. Excellent soil composition, superior water rights, good transportation access. Currently operating at approximately 60% of potential capacity due to outdated irrigation, methods, and suboptimal crop selection. She highlighted the financial assessment. The operation is carrying substantial debt, approximately $8.2 million in mortgages and equipment loans. Based on their current cash flow and projected harvest values, they'll be unable to meet obligations within 3 to 4 months. Estimated acquisition cost in a distressed sale scenario, $18 million, well below the $30 million market value the properties would command if operating at full capacity. James studied the report with interest. And your assessment of improvement? Potential, substantial, Sarah confirmed. Implementation of our integrated irrigation and soil management systems could increase yields by 30 to 40% within 2 growing seasons. Transition to a more diverse crop rotation would improve soil health and reduce susceptibility to market fluctuations for any single commodity. She moved to the final slide. Conservative 5-year ROI projection, 75–90%, assuming moderate commodity price stability. James whistled softly. Impressive. Any red flags? Sarah hesitated, glancing at me. Just one, which came up during our title search. The current owner, Victor Harrison, is my father-in-law, I finished for her. Yes, I'm aware. Sarah looked startled. You knew? I mean, of course you knew, but you didn't. I mean, we weren't instructed to treat it differently from any other evaluation. That was deliberate, I explained. We wanted an unbiased assessment based purely on business merits. James nodded his approval. And now that we have that assessment, we need to discuss how to proceed, given the personal connection. After Sarah left, James leaned back in his chair, studying me carefully. You know this changes things. Does it? I challenged. The analysis is sound. The Harrison properties meet our criteria better than most of the other targets. I'm not questioning the analysis, James clarified. I'm questioning whether we can execute an acquisition without the appearance, or reality, of a conflict of interest. I'd been considering this problem for weeks. I think we can, if we implement proper protocols. First, I recuse myself from any direct negotiations. Second, we disclose the family relationship in all formal communications. Third, we ensure all offers and terms are consistent with market standards and our established criteria. James nodded slowly. Those are good starts. But there's another complication we haven't discussed. What's that? Victor Harrison isn't just going to see this as a business transaction. He's going to see it as a personal attack. His son-in-law attempting to seize his legacy. His reaction could complicate the acquisition significantly, possibly even scuttling it entirely. I'd considered this as well. You're right, which is why I think we need to be proactive rather than reactive. Before we make any formal moves, I should speak with him directly. James raised his eyebrows in surprise. You want to warn him of our interest? That could give him time to find other options or mount defenses. Or it could demonstrate that we're approaching this ethically and transparently, I countered. Besides, I promised Isabella there would be no hidden agendas or revenge motives in this process. After further discussion, we agreed on a framework. I would speak with Victor privately to inform him of AgriFund's interest in the Harrison properties, explaining our business model and offering to answer any questions. Subsequently, James would handle all formal communications and negotiations, with me recused from direct involvement, except where my agricultural technology expertise was specifically required. That evening, I shared the evaluation results and our planned approach with Isabella. She listened attentively, curled up beside me on our living room sofa. So the farms really do meet your acquisition criteria, she observed. This isn't just about us. They're actually one of the most promising targets, I confirmed. Prime land, good infrastructure, just poorly managed in recent years. Exactly the type of operation AgriFund was created to revitalize. She was quiet for a moment, absently stroking our recently adopted rescue cat, Milo, who had claimed her lap. And you're really going to talk to Dad directly, before making any formal moves? I think it's the right thing to do. No ambushes, no surprises. Just a straightforward business conversation. Isabella sighed. He's not going to see it that way, you know, no matter how professionally you present it. I know, but at least I'll have made the effort. What happens after that is up to him. She leaned her head against my shoulder. When did you want to do this? Soon, before word gets out through other channels. Maybe at the family dinner this Sunday? She shook her head emphatically. Not at dinner. Not with, Mom and Richard there. That would just create an impossible situation for everyone. She thought for a moment. Invite him for lunch, just the two of you. Neutral territory, not his office or ours. The suggestion made sense, though the thought of a one-on-one lunch with Victor made my stomach clench. In our 3 years of marriage, we had never had a private conversation that lasted more than a few minutes. Will he accept an invitation from me? I wondered aloud. Tell him it's about a business opportunity related to the farms, Isabella suggested. That's not even a lie. The next morning I made the call, half expecting to be dismissed or redirected to Victor's assistant. To my surprise, he answered his private line on the second ring. Harrison, he barked, his voice as commanding. Over the phone as in person. Victor. It's Marcus Reynolds, I said, keeping my tone deliberately casual and professional. I was hoping we might have lunch next week. There's a business matter I'd like to discuss with you. There was a pause, just long enough to be noticeable. What kind of business matter? It concerns agricultural technology applications for operations like Harrison Farms, I replied, carefully threading the needle between honesty and full disclosure. I'd prefer to discuss the details in person. Another pause. Then, fine, Tuesday, 12:30, the Metropolitan Club. He named an exclusive downtown establishment where he was undoubtedly a long-standing member. I'll see you then, I confirmed, and the line went dead without further pleasantries. Isabella was right. He had agreed to meet. Now I just had to prepare for what would likely be one of the most difficult conversations of my professional life. The following Tuesday, I arrived at the Metropolitan Club 15 minutes early, dressed in my best suit, still modest by the standards of the old-money Seattle elite who frequented the place, but appropriate for a business lunch. The maitre d' escorted me to a corner table where Victor was already seated, studying a menu with reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. Marcus, he acknowledged without standing, gesturing to the chair across from him. Prompt, as usual. I took my seat, noting that he had already ordered a scotch despite the early hour. Thank you for meeting me, Victor, You mentioned a business opportunity, he said, setting aside his menu. I assume it's something to do with that new venture James Mercer is launching, the acquisition fund. The question caught me off guard. We hadn't made any public announcements about AgriFund yet. You're well informed, I observed carefully. A thin smile crossed his face. Seattle's agricultural business community is smaller than you might think. Word gets around. He took a sip of his scotch. So, you're here to pitch me on some new technology for the Harrison operations. Irrigation systems, soil monitoring, drone surveillance. For a man whose businesses were reportedly months from bankruptcy, he projected remarkable confidence. Either Richard had exaggerated the severity of their financial situation, or Victor was a master of denial. Actually, no, I replied evenly. I'm here to inform you, as a professional courtesy, that the Harrison properties have been identified as potential acquisition targets for AgriFund. Victor's expression didn't change, but his knuckles whitened around his glass. Have they indeed? Yes. Our analysis team conducted an evaluation of 15 distressed agricultural properties across 3 states. The Harrison farms ranked among the top candidates based on land quality, improvement potential, and strategic fit for our year portfolio. How fascinating, Victor said, his voice dangerously soft. And did your analysis team happen to know they were evaluating your father-in-law's property? No, I answered truthfully. The evaluations were conducted blind to using consistent criteria across all properties. The family connection was only revealed after the preliminary assessments were complete. The waiter approached, and we paused our conversation to order. A simple salad for me, steak for Victor. When we were alone again, Victor leaned forward. Let me make sure I understand correctly, he said, his voice still controlled but with an undercurrent of anger. You've been investigating my business affairs, determined that we're in some kind of financial distress, and now you're planning to, what? Swoop in and buy the farms out from under me. Not at all, I replied calmly. First, our assessment was based entirely on publicly available information. Loan registrations, property valuations, crop reports. Second, we haven't made any decisions about which properties to pursue. I'm here specifically because I wanted to discuss this with you directly before any formal steps are taken. How considerate, Victor said sarcastically. And what exactly did you hope to accomplish with this courtesy call? My blessing, my gratitude that you'd consider purchasing my family's legacy when I'm supposedly on the verge of losing it. I maintained my composure despite his increasingly hostile tone. What I hoped to accomplish was transparency. AgriFund is a legitimate business venture with a sound model for revitalizing underperforming agricultural operations. If the Harrison properties do eventually come to market, through whatever circumstances, we would be interested in acquiring them, not to dismantle them, but to restore them to productivity using modern methods. Modern methods, Victor repeated with thinly veiled contempt. You mean the gadgets and gizmos you've been peddling to farmers too ignorant to know better? The dismissal of our technology that had demonstrably improved outcomes for dozens of farms, stung. But I refused to be baited into an argument. I mean integrated systems that reduce water usage by 30%, increase yields by 20–40%, and substantially improve soil health and sustainability, I replied evenly. Systems that have helped operations like the Wilkinson farm go from the brink of foreclosure to profitability in less than 2 growing seasons. Victor waved his hand dismissively. The Harrison farms have been operating successfully for 3 generations without such interventions. This was my opening. Have they, Victor? Because public records indicate otherwise. The third quarter operating statements filed with your primary lender show negative cash flow for 9 consecutive quarters. Equipment loan payments have been consistently late for the past 6 months, and property tax assessments on the western parcel were appealed twice last year, presumably to reduce the tax burden. The color drained from Victor's face, then returned in a flush of anger. Why, you've been spying on my business. As I said, this is all publicly available information, I reminded him. The same information any potential buyer or investor would review during standard due diligence. Our food arrived, creating a momentary pause in the increasingly tense conversation. Victor stared at his steak without touching it, then looked up at me with hard eyes. "Why are you really here, Marcus? To gloat? To enjoy watching the mighty Victor Harrison brought low? Is this some kind of revenge for what I said at your wedding?" The question hung between us, forcing me to examine my own motives yet again. Was there a part of me, however small, that was enjoying this reversal of fortune? The man who had declared I had no future now facing the end of his own. "No," I said finally, meaning it. "This isn't about the wedding or about personal history at all. It's about good land being mismanaged and a business opportunity to restore it to productivity. If the circumstances were different, if you weren't my father-in-law, we would be having exactly the same conversation with whoever owned those properties." Victor studied me for a long moment, seeming to reassess me. "And if I tell you I'm not interested in selling to you or your fund, under any circumstances, that's certainly your prerogative," I acknowledged. "But if the financial situation is as serious as our analysis suggests, you may eventually face limited options. Bankruptcy proceedings, foreclosure, these processes tend to remove choices from owners' hands." A flash of something like fear crossed Victor's face before he masked it with renewed confidence. "Your analysis is flawed. The Harrison farms are experiencing a temporary cash flow issue, nothing more. By next harvest, we'll be back on solid footing." I didn't argue, though I knew from Richard that the situation was far more dire than a temporary cash flow issue. Instead, I simply nodded. "I hope that's the case. A strong agricultural community benefits everyone in the region. Let me be absolutely clear," Victor said, leaning forward again. "If you or your fund make any move toward my properties, I will fight you with every resource at my disposal. Legal, financial, personal, everything. Is that understood?" "Perfectly," I replied, maintaining my calm demeanor. "And I appreciate your candor." The rest of the lunch passed in strained small talk about weather conditions and commodity prices. Victor barely touched his food, while I methodically worked through my salad, despite having lost my appetite. When the check came, Victor insisted on paying, a final assertion of his perceived status and control. As we stood to leave, Victor fixed me with a penetrating stare. "Does Isabella know about this initiative of yours?" "Yes," I answered honestly. "We discussed it thoroughly before I contacted you." For the first time, he seemed genuinely surprised. "And she approves of you targeting her family's legacy? She believes, as I do, that business decisions should be made on merit, not personal connections, positive or negative." Victor shook his head slowly. "I never thought my own daughter would—" He didn't finish the sentence, but his meaning was clear. In his mind, Isabella was choosing me over her family heritage. "This isn't about choosing sides," I said quietly. "It's about facing reality and finding the best path forward for everyone involved, including the land itself." Victor buttoned his suit jacket, his expression hardening again. "You always did have a way with words, Marcus, but actions speak louder, and your actions tell me everything I need to know about your character." With that parting shot, he strode away, leaving me standing in the elegant dining room, watched curiously by the other patrons who had undoubtedly noticed the tension at our table. I returned to the office physically exhausted, as if I'd run a marathon rather than attended a lunch. James was waiting in my office, eager for a report. "How did it go?" he asked as soon as I closed the door. "About as well as could be expected, Ian," I replied, sinking into my chair. "He denied any financial problems, accused me of spying on his business, and threatened to fight us with every resource at his disposal if we pursue the properties." James winced. "So exactly as predicted." "Pretty much." I loosened my tie, feeling a headache building behind my eyes. "The question is, where do we go from here?" "Professionally speaking, we proceed according to our established protocols," James advised. "The Harrison properties remain in our acquisition pool based on their objective merits. We continue, monitoring their financial situation and prepare for possible action if and when they enter formal distress proceedings. I nodded slowly. And personally speaking, James's expression softened slightly. That's considerably more complicated, isn't it? There's Isabella to consider, and your long-term relationship with her family. Victor asked if Isabella knows about our interest in the farms, I said. When I told him yes, he seemed betrayed, as if she's choosing me over family. Loyalty. Is she? I thought about our conversations, about Isabella's growing independence from her father's expectations. I don't think she sees it that way. She's choosing a realistic approach to a difficult situation over emotional denial. The farms are going to change hands one way or another. Victor's financial situation guarantees that. The only question is whether they go to developers, corporate conglomerates, or to people who care about maintaining their agricultural purpose. James stood to leave, patting my shoulder as he passed. John, for what it's worth, I think you handled this as ethically as possible. What happens next is largely in Victor's hands. That evening, Isabella was waiting anxiously when I arrived home, immediately setting aside the marketing materials she'd been reviewing. How did it go? She asked, her expression a mixture of hope and dread. I recounted the lunch conversation as accurately as possible, trying not to editorialize or soften Victor's reactions. Isabella deserved the unvarnished truth, however uncomfortable. He really threatened to fight you with every resource at his disposal, she asked, shaking her head in disbelief. What does he think this is? A medieval conflict over land and honor? In his mind, maybe it is, I suggested. The Harrison name has been on those deeds for 3 generations. The idea of losing them, especially to me, must feel like the end of everything he values. Isabella paced our living room, agitation evident in every movement. But that's just it. He's already losing them. His management has driven them to the brink of bankruptcy. If it weren't for your interest, they'd probably end up being subdivided for housing developments. She stopped suddenly, turning to face me. Unless, did you get the sense he has some other plan? Some way out of his financial troubles? I considered the question carefully. He claimed the issues were temporary and would be resolved by next harvest. But his body, language told a different story. I think he's in denial, or bluffing, or both. Classic Dad, she sighed. He'd rather go down with the ship than admit he needs help navigating the storm. My phone chimed with a text message. It was Richard. Need to talk. Tomorrow. Morning, same place to 7:30. I showed the message to Isabella, who nodded her consent. He probably heard about your lunch with Dad. Be careful what you say, though. Richard's in an impossible position. The next morning, I arrived at the coffee shop to find Richard already there, nursing what appeared to be his second cup of coffee based on the empty cup pushed to the side. The shadows under his eyes had deepened, and his normally well-groomed appearance was slightly disheveled. He fired our irrigation manager yesterday, Richard said without preamble as I sat down. Carl Simmons, 22 years with the company. Fired him because he suggested we might consider some of your soil moisture monitoring systems. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, genuinely distressed. Carl was a good man with a family to support. It gets worse, Richard continued, and lowering his voice. Dad's called in every personal favor, leveraged every relationship, trying to secure bridge financing. He's convinced he can turn things around if he can just get through the next 6 months. And can he? Richard shook his head emphatically. Not a chance. Our irrigation infrastructure is failing. Our equipment is outdated, and our yields have been declining for 3 consecutive seasons. Even if he secured enough money to keep the creditors at bay, the fundamental issues would remain. Did he mention our lunch? I asked carefully. Richard gave a bitter laugh. Mention it. It's all he talked about at dinner last night. How his son-in-law is circling like a vulture, waiting for the Harrison empire to collapse. How you've been spying on our finances, applauding behind his back. I winced. I explained that our assessment was based entirely on publicly available information, and I went to him directly, specifically to avoid the appearance of plotting behind his back. "I know," Richard assured me, "and for what it's worth, I told him the same thing, that you were being transparent and professional." He sighed heavily. He didn't want to hear it. A troubling thought occurred to me. "Is he upset with Isabella as well?" Richard hesitated. "He hasn't spoken her name since your lunch. Mom tried to bring her up at dinner, and he just changed the subject." The news hit me harder than I expected. Victor's disapproval of me was one thing, but the idea of him shutting out his own daughter because of my business interests was something else entirely. "I never wanted to come between Isabella and her family," I said quietly. "This isn't your fault," Richard insisted. "Dad's pride is the problem here, not your business decisions." He finished his coffee and stood up. "I should get to the office. Just wanted to give you a heads up about the atmosphere. It's going to get worse before it gets better." "Richard," I called as he turned to leave, "what do you want to happen here? With the farms, I mean." He paused, considering the question seriously. "I want them to survive as farms," he said finally, "not be carved up for housing developments or strip malls. And I want the Harrison name to maintain some connection to them, if possible." He met my eyes directly. "Beyond that, I'm a realist. Dad's management has brought us to this point, and something has to change." After Richard left, I sat alone with my thoughts, weighing the professional opportunity against the personal cost. AgriFund stood to make an excellent return if we acquired and revitalized the Harrison properties. But at what price to my marriage? To Isabella's relationship with her family? Over the next few weeks, the situation with Victor deteriorated. Further, he stopped attending industry events where we might cross paths, instructed his assistant to hang up if I called his office, and most painfully for Isabella, canceled the monthly family dinner tradition that had been maintained for decades. Eleanor, caught in the middle as always, tried to smooth things over with apologetic phone calls to Isabella, explanations about Victor being under tremendous stress, and suggestions that this will all blow over eventually. But Isabella wasn't deceived. "He's cutting me out," she said one evening, after another call from her mother making excuses for Victor's behavior, just like he did when I chose Stanford over Washington State, when I took the marketing job instead of coming to work for him. When I don't make the choices he wants, I cease to exist in his world. The hurt in her voice was palpable, and I felt a surge of anger toward Victor. His pride wasn't just threatening his business now, it was damaging his relationship with his daughter. "I'm so sorry, Bella," I said, holding her close. "If you want me to back off, tell AgriFund to remove the Harrison properties from consideration. I will. Your relationship with your family comes first." She pulled away slightly, looking me directly in the eyes. "No. That's exactly what he wants. For me to choose between you and the family legacy. I refuse to play that game anymore." "Are you sure? This will only get more difficult as we move forward." Isabella straightened her shoulders, a determination in her expression that reminded me why I had fallen in love with her in the first place. "I'm sure. The farms are going to change. Hands regardless of what we do. At least with AgriFund involved, there's a chance they'll remain agricultural properties rather than being carved up for development." Her resolve strengthened my own. We would proceed with the evaluation of the Harrison properties, not out of personal vendetta or spite, but because it represented the best chance to preserve something valuable, both the land itself and, perhaps someday, the family connections that Victor's pride was currently jeopardizing. The next morning, James and I met with our acquisition team to formalize our approach. We established clear ethical guidelines, complete transparency in all communications, proper disclosure of family relationships in all legal documents, and my formal recusal from acquisition decisions specific to the Harrison properties. "This is going to get messy," James warned as we concluded the meeting. "Victor Harrison isn't going to surrender without a fight, especially now that he sees this as a personal betrayal. I know, I acknowledged, but we're approaching this the right way, for the right reasons. Whatever happens next, we can face it with clean hands and clear consciences. As we left the conference room, I couldn't help reflecting on the irony of the situation. 4 years ago, Victor Harrison had publicly declared I had no promising future ahead of me. Now, I was potentially positioned to acquire and revitalize the very legacy he had deemed me unworthy to touch. Life's symmetry could be both brutal and beautiful in equal measure. The battle lines were drawn. The weeks and months ahead would test not just our business acumen, but the strength of our family bonds and personal principles. I was determined to navigate the challenges with integrity, focusing on the land and its potential, rather than the vindication that a small, wounded part of me still craved. Because in the end, this wasn't about proving Victor Harrison wrong about me. It was about proving him right about something far more important, that the Harrison agricultural legacy was worth preserving, even if it required embracing the very innovations and outsiders he had so stubbornly resisted. The Harrison family crisis reached its breaking point on a rainy Tuesday in late October, nearly 4 months after my lunch with Victor. A process server arrived at our office with bankruptcy notices. Harrison Farming Enterprises had officially filed for Chapter 11 reorganization. The creditors, led by Agribank Midwest, had finally lost patience with Victor's promises and demanded action. I sat at my desk, staring at the legal documents, feeling a complex mixture of emotions. Professionally, this was the development we had anticipated, the trigger that would allow AgriFund to formally pursue acquisition of the Harrison properties. Personally, it represented the collapse of my father-in-law's life work and potentially the final rupture in his relationship with Isabella. James appeared in my doorway, his expression somber. "I assume you've heard." I nodded, holding up the documents. "It's official. Their primary lender forced the filing after the Harrisons missed their 3rd consecutive loan payment." "This changes the timeline considerably," James observed, closing the door and taking a seat across from me. "The bankruptcy court will likely schedule the asset auction within 60 to 90 days. Assuming Victor doesn't find a way to delay the proceedings," I added, knowing my father-in-law's propensity for fighting lost causes. James leaned forward, fingers steepled beneath his chin. "Marcus, I need to ask you something directly, and I need an honest answer." "Of course. Given the family complications, are you still committed to AgriFund pursuing these properties?" This is the moment where personal and professional considerations become unavoidably entangled. It was the question I'd been asking myself for months, and yet, faced with the reality rather than the theoretical, I found my resolve wavering. "Slightly. I've discussed this extensively with Isabella," I said carefully. "We both agree that AgriFund should evaluate and pursue the properties based on their business merits, not our family connection." "That's the professional answer," James noted. "I'm asking for the personal one. Can you handle what comes next? The legal battles, the family tension, the potential for permanent estrangement from your in-laws?" I took a deep breath, appreciating his directness. "I believe I can, but more importantly, I believe it's the right thing to do, for the land, for the employees who depend on those farms, and yes, even for the Harrison family in the long run, whether they see it that way or not." James studied me for a moment, then nodded. "Very well. From this point forward, you're officially recused from all acquisition decisions regarding the Harrison properties. You'll have no involvement in valuation, bidding strategy, or negotiations. This will be documented and disclosed to the bankruptcy court to avoid any appearance of impropriety." "Agreed," I said, relieved by the clear boundary. "I'll focus on the technological implementation plans, assuming we're successful in the acquisition." "One more thing," James added, rising to leave. "Have you spoken with Isabella today?" "Not since breakfast. Why?" "The bankruptcy filing will be public record by now. The local business press has probably already picked up the story. You might want to call her before she hears it elsewhere." He was right, of course. I immediately dialed Isabella's cell, but it went straight to voicemail. She was likely in a client meeting at the marketing firm where she had returned to work part-time, after finding the dual roles of wife and business partner too all-consuming. I left a message asking her to call me as soon as possible. Before I could contemplate my next move, my phone rang. It was Richard. "I assume you've heard," he said without preamble, his voice strained. "Just got the court documents," and I confirmed. "Richard, I'm sorry it's come to this." He gave a hollow laugh. "Don't be. It's been inevitable for months. Dad's just been postponing the inevitable, making things worse in the process." "How is he taking it?" "Mighty, how do you think? He locked himself in his study when the lawyers left. Wouldn't speak to anyone, not even Mom. I'm worried about him. Marcus. He's 65, and his entire identity is wrapped up in those farms. This isn't just a business failure for him. It's a personal one." The genuine concern in Richard's voice touched me. Despite everything, he still cared deeply about his father's well-being. "Is there anything I can do?" I offered. Though what comfort I could possibly provide to Victor was beyond my imagination. "Actually, yes," Richard said, surprising me. "Come to the house tonight. Both you and Isabella. We're having a family meeting to discuss options now that the bankruptcy is official. Dad needs to understand that there are paths forward, even if they're not the ones he would have chosen." The request took me aback. "Are you sure that's wise? Victor hasn't spoken to either of us in months. My presence might only make things worse." "Maybe," Richard acknowledged. "But this crisis calls for honesty, not comfortable silences. AgriFund is positioned to be a major bidder for the properties, correct?" "Correct, though I've been officially recused from those decisions to avoid conflicts of interest. Nevertheless, you understand the technological plans, the vision for revitalization. Dad needs to hear that, to understand that this isn't just about liquidating his life's work, but potentially preserving and enhancing it under new ownership." I hesitated, weighing the potential benefits against the near certainty of Victor's hostility. "I'll need to discuss it with Isabella. This affects her relationship with her family most directly." "Of course," Richard agreed. "Just let me know soon. The meeting's at 7. After we hung up, I sat contemplating the situation, a family meeting at the Harrison estate, to discuss the bankruptcy and potential acquisition. It seemed more like walking into an ambush than a productive discussion. Yet Richard's plea had seemed genuine, and the opportunity to present AgriFund's vision directly to the family had undeniable appeal. Isabella called back 20 minutes later, her voice tight with emotion. "I just saw the news alert. It's really happening, isn't it?" "Yes," I confirmed gently. "The filing was made this morning. Richard called just after I left you a message. He's invited us to a family meeting tonight to discuss options." There was a long pause. "At the house? With Dad?" "Yes. Richard thinks it's important that your father understand there are paths forward, including AgriFund's potential acquisition and revitalization plans." Another pause, longer this time. "Do you think it's a good idea? Dad hasn't spoken my name in months, according to Mom. Having both of us there might just make him shut down completely." "Honestly, I don't know," I admitted. "But Richard seemed genuinely concerned about your father's state of mind. This might be an opportunity to bridge some of the distance, or at least to ensure everyone has the same information about what happens next." Isabella sighed heavily. "All right. I'll meet you at the office at 6, and we can drive out together. But Marcus." "Yes? Let's be prepared for the worst. Dad's pride has always been his defining characteristic. Having to face bankruptcy in front of the son-in-law he disparaged. It might bring out something ugly." Her warning stayed with me throughout the afternoon as I prepared materials outlining AgriFund's approach to property revitalization. Not detailed acquisition plans. Those would be inappropriate given my recusal, but general information about our technological implementations and management philosophy. If Victor was willing to listen, I wanted him to understand that we weren't corporate raiders looking to strip assets, but agricultural innovators committed to preserving and enhancing the land's productivity. Isabella arrived at my office. Precisely at 6 I saw her looking simultaneously professional and apprehensive in a navy blue dress and light jacket. Though we had been married for nearly 4 years, the sight of her still made my heart skip. Her dark hair pulled back in a simple twist, her intelligent eyes reflecting both strength and vulnerability. "Ready for the lion's den?" she asked, attempting a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, gathering my materials and jacket. "Remember, we're going as family members concerned about the future, yet not as business adversaries." The drive to the Harrison estate took 40 minutes, much of it in thoughtful silence. As we passed through the imposing gates that had once intimidated me, I reflected on how much had changed. The property still exuded wealth and permanence, but now I knew it was a facade concealing financial ruin and mismanagement. Eleanor met us at the door, her elegant features strained with worry, but her manners impeccable as always. "Isabella. Marcus." She greeted us with quick embraces. "Thank you for coming. Richard's in the library with the financial advisors. Your father is still getting ready." The careful phrasing told us all we needed to know. Victor was still struggling with the idea of facing us, particularly me. The Harrison Library was a magnificent room. 2 stories of leather-bound books surrounding a massive oak table that had hosted family discussions for generations. Richard stood near the fireplace with 2 men in conservative suits, presumably the financial advisors he had mentioned. They were reviewing documents with grave expressions. "Izzy, Marcus." Richard acknowledged us with visible relief. "Thank you for coming. Let me introduce Martin Wheeler and David Jeffries from BRK Financial Advisors. They've been consulting on the bankruptcy proceedings." We exchanged handshakes and pleasantries, though the circumstances were anything but pleasant. Richard offered us drinks, which we both declined. The tension in the room was palpable as we awaited Victor's arrival. He entered 15 minutes later, and I was shocked by his appearance. In the 4 months since our lunch, Victor Harrison seemed to have aged a decade. The commanding presence that had once filled any room he entered was diminished. His shoulders slightly stooped, his silver hair unkempt. Only his eyes retained their fierce intensity, especially when they landed on me. "I see everyone's here," he said, his voice still strong despite his altered appearance. "Let's get this over with." Eleanor took a seat beside him, placing a supportive hand on his arm. The financial advisors began their presentation, outlining the bankruptcy process in clear, unemotional terms. The Harrison Farming Enterprises held assets valued at approximately $32 million. Primarily the 3 contiguous properties and equipment. Liabilities totaled just over $15 million, including mortgages, equipment loans, and outstanding vendor payments. In theory, selling the assets should cover the debts with significant value remaining for the family. "The challenge," explained Mr. Wheeler, "is that agricultural property of this size doesn't sell quickly or easily in the current market. Broken into smaller parcels, it might fetch higher per-acre prices, but would lose the operational cohesion that gives it special value." "And the timeline?" Richard asked, though he likely knew the answer. "The court has set an initial auction date of January 15th, Mr. Jeffries replied. "Approximately 90 days from now. Potential buyers will have 60 days to conduct due diligence and submit qualifying bids." Throughout the presentation, Victor sat stone-faced, offering no comments or questions. It was as if he had removed himself emotionally from the proceedings, treating them as someone else's problem rather than the dismantling of his life's work. "Are there alternatives to the auction?" Eleanor asked, breaking her silence. "Some arrangement that might allow us to retain ownership or control of at least part of the properties?" Mr. Wheeler exchanged glances with his colleague. "There are always possibilities, Mrs. Harrison. A restructuring plan with significant external investment could potentially satisfy the creditors while maintaining family involvement. The challenge is finding investors willing to inject capital without taking controlling interest." This was the opening Richard had been waiting for. "That's actually why I asked Marcus and Isabella to join us tonight," he said, turning to me. "Marcus, could you explain how AgriFund approaches these situations?" All eyes turned to me, Victor's gaze particularly penetrating. I cleared my throat, determined to remain professional despite the personal undercurrents. For AgriFund was created specifically to address situations like this, I began, careful to use the third person rather than we to emphasize my recusal from acquisition decisions. The fund acquires distressed agricultural properties and implements integrated technology solutions to restore productivity and profitability. I outlined our general approach: soil monitoring systems, precision irrigation, data-driven crop selection, and sustainable farming practices, using examples from other successful implementations. I emphasized that AgriFund maintained the agricultural nature of the properties, rather than converting them to development, and typically retained experienced local management to ensure continuity. That sounds like a corporate takeover with a friendly face, Victor finally spoke, his voice dripping with disdain. You buy low from desperate sellers, implement a few gadgets, and flip the properties for profit, hardly the preservation of a family legacy. I met his gaze steadily. That's not an accurate characterization. AgriFund's model includes various structures for former owners to maintain involvement, from consulting roles to minority equity positions. The goal isn't to erase history but to build on it sustainably. And you expect me to believe that you'd offer such considerations? To my family, after positioning yourself to capitalize on our difficulties. Before I could respond, Isabella leaned forward. Dad, that's not fair, and you know it. Marcus came to you months ago, transparently informing you of AgriFund's potential interest. He's been officially recused from all decisions regarding the Harrison properties, precisely to avoid conflicts of interest. Victor turned to his daughter, his expression softening slightly. Isabella, you can't truly believe this is coincidental. Your husband's fund just happens to be poised to acquire our family's heritage at the precise moment of vulnerability. It's not his fund, Isabella corrected firmly. He's a minority partner in AgriFund, and as I said, he's recused from decisions about your properties. And as for the precise moment of vulnerability, Dad, this didn't happen overnight. You've had years of warning signs that the farms were in trouble, years of opportunities to modernize or seek help. The room fell silent at her directness. Even the financial advisors looked uncomfortable, shuffling papers unnecessarily. Perhaps we should take a brief break, Eleanor suggested diplomatically. The coffee should be ready in the sitting room. The advisors quickly excused themselves, followed by Eleanor and Richard. Isabella hesitated, then stood to join them, squeezing my shoulder as she passed, a gesture of solidarity that didn't go unnoticed by her father. Left alone with Victor, I expected continued hostility or perhaps stony silence. Instead, he surprised me by pouring 2 fingers of scotch from the library's sidebar and offering me a glass. I don't imagine this is how you pictured things unfolding, he said, his tone less combative than before. I accepted the drink cautiously. No one takes satisfaction in seeing a family business face bankruptcy, Victor. Especially not one with such history and significance. He gave a short, humorless laugh. Spare me the platitudes, Marcus. We both know there's a certain symmetry to this situation. The man who would never amount to anything, now, positioned to acquire the legacy of the man who dismissed him. The reference to his wedding toast caught me off guard. It was the first time he had ever directly acknowledged those words or their impact. This isn't about vindication or symmetry, I said carefully. It's about the land itself. 3 excellent properties with tremendous potential, currently operating well below capacity due to outdated methods. That's a business opportunity, yes, but it's also a chance to preserve something important rather than seeing it broken up or converted to non-agricultural use. Victor took a long sip of his scotch, studying me over the rim of his glass. "Well, you've become quite the businessman," he observed, and I couldn't tell if it was an insult or a compliment. "Tell me something, and I want honesty. If AgriFund acquires the properties, what happens to the Harrison name? To the legacy my grandfather started, my father built, and I expanded." The question revealed the heart of his concern, not just financial loss, but historical erasure. For Victor, these weren't simply assets, they were the physical, manifestation of his family's identity and achievements. That would depend partly on the terms negotiated, I answered honestly. But speaking personally, I would advocate strongly for maintaining the Harrison connection, perhaps retaining the existing property names, creating a historical display about the family's contributions to regional agriculture, and definitely establishing roles for family members who want to remain involved, including me, he asked directly. If that's what you wanted, yes. Your knowledge of these properties, their history, their particular challenges, their community relationships, is invaluable. Victor finished his scotch and set the glass down with deliberate precision. You know what the worst part of all this is, Marcus. It's not losing the farms, it's having to admit you were right. The admission shocked me into momentary silence. Your technological innovations, your focus on medium-sized operations, your integrated systems approach, it's exactly what the Harrison farms needed 5 years ago, he continued. If I had listened instead of dismissing gadgets and gizmos, we might not be sitting here discussing bankruptcy. The acknowledgement, years in coming and delivered in the most painful circumstances, stirred complex emotions. There was a certain vindication, yes, but also sadness that it had taken financial ruin to bring Victor to this realization. It's not too late, I offered cautiously. The bankruptcy process takes time. There might be alternatives to a complete sale, ways to preserve family involvement while implementing the necessary modernization. Victor studied me with renewed intensity. What are you suggesting, exactly? A partnership structure, I said, the idea forming as I spoke. Rather than AgriFund acquiring the properties outright, we could propose a joint venture. The Harrison family would retain a significant minority stake. AgriFund would invest the capital needed for modernization and debt restructuring, and together we'd implement the technological innovations needed to restore profitability. Arched an eyebrow skeptically, and your partners would agree to this, giving up controlling interest in what could be a straightforward acquisition. If the terms made business sense, yes. The value of these properties isn't just in the land, it's in the knowledge, relationships, and continuity that come with the Harrison involvement. For the first time in our conversation, saw a flicker of genuine interest in Victor's eyes. What kind of ownership split would you envision? Perhaps 70-30, I suggested, knowing I was stretching beyond my authority, but feeling compelled to explore the possibility. AgriFund would have operational control and implementation authority for the technological systems, but major decisions would require consensus, and the Harrison family would maintain significant equity and ongoing involvement. Victor leaned back in his chair, considering. It would still mean surrendering control, something I've never done in my entire career. It would, I acknowledged. But it would also mean preserving the legacy in a meaningful way, rather than seeing it divided and dispersed through bankruptcy auction. Before Victor could respond, the door opened and the others returned from their coffee break. Isabella immediately sensed the shift in atmosphere, looking questioningly between her father and me. Marcus has made an interesting suggestion, Victor announced to the group, surprising me with his directness. A potential partnership structure rather than an outright acquisition. Mr. Wheeler, would such an arrangement be potentially acceptable to the creditors? The financial advisor looked startled, but quickly recovered his professional demeanor. If it provided for immediate payment of the outstanding debts and presented a viable path forward, yes, it could potentially satisfy the court and the creditors. I should emphasize, I added quickly, that this is just a conceptual suggestion at this point. I'm recused from acquisition decisions regarding the Harrison properties, so any formal proposal would need to come from James Mercer and the AgriFund Management Committee. Of course, Victor nodded, surprising me again with his reasonableness. But if the concept has merit, perhaps a preliminary discussion with Mr. Mercer would be appropriate. Richard looked between us in astonishment. Are you two actually considering working together? Not working together, Victor corrected, sharply. forming a structured business arrangement that preserves family interests while addressing financial realities. Isabella caught my eye, a mixture of hope and skepticism in her expression. She knew her father well enough to be wary of sudden reasonableness, especially in desperate circumstances. The remainder of the meeting focused on practical next steps. Richard would reach out to James to arrange a preliminary discussion of partnership possibilities. The financial advisors would prepare an analysis of how such an arrangement might satisfy the bankruptcy court's requirements. Isabella offered to draft a communication framework for keeping all stakeholders informed as discussions progressed. Throughout these planning conversations, I noticed Victor watching me with a calculating expression, as if reassessing everything he thought he knew about me. When the meeting concluded and we prepared to leave, he approached Isabella and me near the door. "I've misjudged many things in recent years," he said, his voice lowered for privacy. "Perhaps you among them, Marcus." It wasn't an apology. Victor Harrison was not a man who apologized easily, if at all, but it was an acknowledgement, and from him, that was significant. "Thank you for considering alternative approaches," I replied carefully. "Whatever happens next, preserving these farms as productive agricultural operations is a goal we share." He nodded curtly, then surprised us both by taking Isabella's hand briefly. "Your mother misses your Sunday calls," he said, then turned and walked away before she could respond. In the car driving home, Isabella finally broke down, tears streaming silently down her face as the tension of the evening released. I reached across to take her hand, respecting her need to process the emotional tumult without immediate conversation. "Do you think he meant it?" she finally asked, as we neared Seattle. "About misjudging you, about being open to a partnership." I considered carefully before answering. "I think he's a proud man facing the loss of everything that defines him. In that situation, even Victor Harrison might reconsider long-held positions. Whether that reconsideration survives beyond the immediate crisis, that's harder to predict. And the partnership idea, do you think AgriFund would really consider it? From a business perspective, wouldn't a clean acquisition be simpler?" "Simpler, yes, but not necessarily optimal," I explained. "There's genuine value in the continuity of management, especially in agriculture where local knowledge and community relationships matter tremendously. If structured properly, a partnership could benefit both parties." Isabella fell silent, again, watching the city lights emerge through the rain-streaked windshield. "It's strange," she said finally. 4 years ago at our wedding, Dad said you had no future. Now you might be the only one who can save his." The irony wasn't lost on me. Life rarely follows the narratives we expect, I observed. Though I admit, I never imagined being in a position to potentially partner with your father rather than simply proving him wrong from a distance. "Would you really want him involved?" she asked bluntly. "After everything he's said and done?" It was the question I'd been asking myself throughout the evening. Professionally, yes, his knowledge of those properties is valuable. Personally, I hesitated, searching for honesty. It would be complicated. But perhaps that complexity is worth navigating if it helps heal the family wounds his pride has created. Isabella leaned her head against my shoulder as I drove, her voice soft but determined. "Just promise me one thing. Whatever business arrangements develop, don't compromise your vision or your integrity to accommodate my father's pride. You've built something important with AgriSmart and AgriFund. That matters too." Her support warmed me deeply. I promise, this isn't about submitting to Victor's vision or imposing mine. It's about finding a third path that preserves what's valuable from both. When we arrived home, I called James despite the late hour, knowing he would want immediate information about the meeting. He listened thoughtfully to my account, including the partnership concept I had floated with Victor. "Interesting," he said when I'd finished. "Not our standard approach, but it has potential merits. The Harrison properties are an unusual case. Prime land with exceptional water rights and strategic location. A structured partnership that leverages family knowledge while implementing our technologies could be viable. You're not concerned about working with Victor? His reputation for difficulty is well earned. James chuckled. I've managed challenging personalities throughout my career, Marcus. The question isn't whether Victor Harrison is difficult. He clearly is. The question is whether a partnership structure creates more value than a straightforward acquisition. And your preliminary assessment? Worth exploring, James concluded. Have Richard contact me tomorrow to set up a meeting. We'll approach this with open minds, but clear eyes. No commitments until we've thoroughly analyzed all implications. After we hung up, I found Isabella in our home office, already drafting the communication framework she had promised. Her capacity to compartmentalize emotion and focus on practical action was one of her many strengths. James thinks the partnership concept has merit, I told her, massaging her shoulders gently as she worked. He's willing to meet with Richard to discuss possibilities. She leaned back into my touch, sighing softly. That's something, at least. A path forward that might not destroy what remains of my family relationships. It's just a beginning, I cautioned. Many details to negotiate, many potential sticking points. Your father and I have fundamentally different approaches to business and agriculture. True, she acknowledged. But you also have a fundamental commonality. You both care deeply about the land itself. That might be enough common ground to build upon. I hoped she was right. After 4 years of antagonism, the prospect of finding common purpose with Victor Harrison seemed almost unimaginable. Yet the events of the evening had revealed possibilities I hadn't considered, not just for business collaboration, but perhaps for a measure of personal reconciliation as well. As I prepared for bed that night, I found myself contemplating the strange turns life takes. 4 years ago, standing humiliated at my own wedding reception, I could never have envisioned a scenario where Victor Harrison would consider me a potential business partner rather than an unworthy son-in-law. The journey from that moment to this one had been neither straight nor easy, but it had led to unexpected opportunities for growth, success, and now, possibly, reconciliation. Whether that possibility would blossom or wither remained to be seen. Victor's pride had deep roots, and one evening of pragmatic discussion didn't erase years of dismissal and disdain. Yet something had shifted. A door had opened that previously seemed permanently closed. As Isabella curled against me in the darkness, her breathing gradually slowing toward sleep, I made a silent promise to approach whatever came next, with both business acumen and personal grace, not for Victor's sake, but for Isabella's, and perhaps, in some small measure, for my own. The morning after our meeting at the Harrison estate, I arrived at the office earlier than usual, my mind racing with the possibilities the partnership concept had opened. James was already there, reviewing documents at his desk, a cup of coffee cooling beside him. You look like a man who hasn't slept much, he observed as I entered his office. Is it that obvious? I asked, dropping into the chair across from him. 4 years of working closely together gives me some insight, he replied with a small smile. That, and the fact that you're wearing the same tie as yesterday. I glanced down and grimaced. He was right. In my distraction, I'd grabbed the same navy and burgundy striped tie from the closet hook. The Harrison situation is consuming you, James noted, not as criticism, but as observation. Understandably so. It's not often that business and family become so thoroughly entangled. I nodded, grateful for his perception. The partnership idea. I know I overstepped by suggesting it directly to Victor. I should have consulted with you first. James waved away. My concern. You were responding to a fluid situation. Besides, the concept has merit. I've been reviewing our portfolio projections this morning, considering how a partnership structure might work compared to outright acquisition. And? He turned his computer screen toward me, showing a detailed financial model. The A numbers are interesting. A 70-30 split as you suggested, with us providing the capital for debt clearance and technological implementation, could potentially yield returns within 2 to 3 percentage points of full acquisition. The difference is essentially the premium we'd pay for Harrison family knowledge and continuity, That sounds promising, I said, leaning forward to study the projections. Promising but complicated, James qualified. Partnership agreements are inherently more complex than acquisitions. Decision-making protocols, dispute resolution mechanisms, exit strategies, all need careful structuring, especially when one partner has your history with Victor Harrison. He was right, of course. A business partnership with Victor would require navigating not just agricultural and financial decisions, but the personal undercurrents that had defined our relationship for years. Richard is coming in at 10 to discuss possibilities. James continued, I've asked our legal team to prepare a preliminary partnership framework for consideration. We'll present it as one option alongside the standard acquisition approach, letting the Harrisons decide which path they prefer. Fair and transparent, I agreed, though part of me wondered whether Victor's moment of pragmatism would survive once he had concrete options before him. The meeting with Richard was scheduled in our conference room, deliberately chosen for its neutral, professional atmosphere, rather than James's office or mine. I arrived early to review the materials our legal team had prepared. 2 comprehensive documents outlining the acquisition and partnership approaches, respectively. Richard arrived precisely at 10, dressed in the practical attire of a working farm manager rather than business formal, khakis, a button-down shirt, and work boots that had seen better days. Despite the casual clothing, his demeanor was all business as he shook hands with James and nodded acknowledgement to me. I appreciate you meeting on such short notice, he said, taking a seat at the conference table. The bankruptcy filing has accelerated everyone's timeline. Understandable, James replied. Marcus shared your conversation from last night, including the partnership concept. We've prepared some preliminary materials for discussion. Richard accepted the folders James handed him, opening the first one with careful attention. 2 options, he noted, flipping between the documents. Acquisition or partnership. Both structured to preserve the agricultural nature of the properties and implement our technological systems, James explained. The key difference is in ownership structure and family involvement going forward. As Richard reviewed the materials, I observed his reactions closely. Unlike Victor, whose emotions typically simmered just beneath a controlled surface, Richard had always been more difficult to read, practical, reserved, less given to passionate declarations or dramatic gestures. The valuation seems fair, he said finally, looking up from the acquisition proposal. Higher than I expected, given the distressed circumstances. We value the properties based on potential, not just current condition, James explained. 2. Our analysis indicates substantial untapped productivity that our systems can unlock relatively quickly. Richard turned to the partnership document, spending even more time with its details. 70-30 split, he noted. Family. Maintains board representation, consulting roles, and option rights for future transactions. He looked up at us. This is surprisingly generous. Not generous, James corrected. Strategic. The Harrison family brings generations of knowledge about those specific properties, soil variations, drainage patterns, microclimate challenges. That institutional memory has significant value when combined with our technological approach. Richard closed the folders, his expression thoughtful. Both options preserve the Harrison name on the properties. That was Marcus's specific request. James acknowledged with a nod in my direction. Then, regardless of ownership structure, the historical connection would be maintained. Richard turned to me directly. Why, after everything my father has said and done, why would you insist on preserving our family name? It was a fair question, one that deserved an honest answer. Because erasing history doesn't serve anyone, I replied. Those farms have been Harrison land for 3 generations. That legacy is part of what makes them valuable, not just financially, but culturally and historically. And it doesn't hurt that maintaining the Harrison name might make the transition more palatable to local suppliers, customers, and community members, Richard observed shrewdly. I smiled slightly. That's true as well. Business and sentiment aren't always separate considerations. Richard nodded, seemingly satisfied with my answer. I'll need to discuss these options with my father, of course, though I suspect I know which way he'll lean. The partnership. Structure? James guessed. Yes, maintaining some ownership, however minor, will matter tremendously to him. Richard hesitated, then added, I should warn you, though, if we pursue the partnership path, my father will likely push for adjustments to these terms, a larger equity stake, more operational input, expanded board rights. That's the nature of negotiations, James said evenly. We're prepared for reasonable counteroffers. As Richard gathered the materials to leave, he paused, looking uncomfortable for the first time. There's something else you should know. My father has scheduled a meeting with Edward Chamberlain tomorrow morning. The name meant nothing to me, but James straightened in his chair. Chamberlain Agricultural Holdings? Richard nodded. Dad reached out to him yesterday. Apparently. I only found out this morning. James and I exchanged glances. Chamberlain Agricultural Holdings was one of the largest private agricultural conglomerates in the western United States, known for aggressive acquisition strategies and deep pockets. That's concerning, James admitted. Is your father exploring a competitive acquisition offer? Richard shrugged helplessly. He didn't share details with me, just mentioned that he's keeping all options open while we explore the AgriFund possibility. After Richard left, James leaned back in his chair with a concerned expression. Chamberlain's involvement changes the landscape considerably. They have the capital to outbid us if they choose to. Would they be interested in the Harrison properties? They typically focus on much larger operations, don't they? James nodded thoughtfully. Generally, yes. But the Harrison farms have strategic value beyond their size. Excellent water rights, prime location, potential for expansion into neighboring properties. He tapped his fingers on the table. Considering, we need to accelerate our timeline. If Victor is playing us against Chamberlain to improve his position, we need to solidify our offer before he creates a bidding war. That evening, I shared the developments with Isabella over dinner in Dansehur, our kitchen, including Richard's revelation about the Chamberlain meeting. Typical dad, she sighed, pushing pasta around her plate without eating much. He always needs to feel he has the upper hand, even when his back is against the wall. The partnership offer is genuinely fair, I assured her. James and our team spent the afternoon refining the details. If your father's meeting with Chamberlain is just a negotiating tactic, it's unnecessary. Isabella gave me a knowing look. It's not just about negotiating tactics. It's about his need to prove he's still in control, still making the decisions. She set down her fork. Should we be worried about Chamberlain? Could they really outbid AgriFund? They have. The resources I acknowledged. The question is whether they have the interest. The Harrison properties are smaller than their typical acquisitions, though strategically valuable. And if they do make a competitive offer, I considered the question carefully. Then the creditors in bankruptcy court will have to decide which option best serves all stakeholders. Our advantage isn't necessarily in the raw numbers, but in our commitment to maintaining the properties as cohesive agricultural operations with continued family involvement. Isabella was quiet for a moment, absently twisting her wedding. Into a habit when deep in thought. I'm going to call Mom, she decided suddenly. She might know more about what Dad is planning with Chamberlain. While Isabella made her call from the living room, I cleaned up the dinner dishes, my mind turning over the implications of Victor's meeting with Chamberlain. Was it simply leverage for better terms from us? Or was he seriously considering an alternative that would cut AgriFund, and by extension, me, out of the picture entirely? Isabella returned 15 minutes later, looking troubled. Mom says Dad has been on the phone constantly since our meeting last night. Calls with attorneys, financial advisors, and apparently several with Edward Chamberlain personally. Did she have any insight into what he's planning? Not specifically, but she mentioned something odd. Dad apparently knew Chamberlain. Years ago, they were classmates or competitors in college or early in their careers. She wasn't clear on the details. This was an unexpected twist. A personal connection could explain Chamberlain's interest in properties that would normally be too small for their portfolio. Isabella sat beside me at the kitchen island, her expression pensive. Marcus, what if Dad is engineering and bored? Alternative specifically to avoid working with you, how much does this opportunity matter to AgriFund, to you personally? The question cut to the heart of the complexities we were navigating. From a business perspective, the Harrison properties are excellent opportunities but not make or break for AgriFund. We have other acquisition targets in the pipeline. I covered her hand with mine. Personally, I admit there would be a certain satisfaction in proving the value of our approaches on your family's land. But that satisfaction isn't worth creating permanent rifts in your family. She squeezed my hand gratefully. I know this is awkward territory where business and family overlap so completely. I just want to make sure we're making decisions we can live with long term. Agreed, I said firmly. Whatever happens with the farms, our priorities remain clear. Your relationship with your family, the health of the land itself, and the integrity of our business approach. Everything else is secondary. The next morning brought unexpected news. Richard called Isabella directly, his voice tight with suppressed emotion. Dad collapsed during his meeting with Chamberlain, he reported. They're taking him to Virginia Mason Medical Center now. Mom's with him. Isabella's face paled as she listened. Heart attack, stroke. The doctors don't know yet. He was conscious but disoriented when the ambulance arrived. I'm heading to the hospital now. Richard hesitated. He asked for you, Izzy. Both of you, actually. He specifically said, Isabella and Marcus. The request stunned us both. After months of estrangement, Victor was asking for his daughter and the son-in-law he had so thoroughly rejected. We'll be there within the hour, Isabella promised. I'd already moving toward the bedroom to change. As we drove to the hospital, Isabella was uncharacteristically quiet, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I reached over to cover them with one of mine. He's going to be okay, I assured her, though I had no medical basis for the claim. Your father is one of the most stubborn, determined people I've ever met. He won't go down easily. She gave me a fragile smile. I know, it's just, we've been so distant these past months. The thought that our last real interaction might have been that tense bankruptcy meeting. I understood her fear. For all their complicated history, Isabella loved her father deeply. The possibility of permanent estrangement becoming final, through tragedy, was understandably terrifying. Virginia Mason's cardiac unit was a model of hushed efficiency as we made our way to the family waiting area. Eleanor was there, looking smaller and more vulnerable than I had ever seen her, with Richard standing protectively beside her chair. Isabella, Eleanor breathed, rising to embrace her daughter. Thank you for coming so quickly. How is he? Isabella asked, returning the embrace tightly. Stabilized, Richard answered. Not a heart attack as they initially suspected. How about a severe cardiac arrhythmia triggered by stress? They're running more tests, but the immediate danger has passed. Relief visibly washed over Isabella. Can we see him? The doctor said family visits in about an hour, once he's settled in a regular room, Eleanor explained, then turned to me with something like apology in her eyes. Marcus, I'm not sure if Victor meant. It's fine, I assured her quickly. I can wait out here. Isabella should go in first anyway. Richard shook his head. No, he specifically asked for both of you, said he had something important to discuss that couldn't wait. The three of us exchanged puzzled glances. What could be so urgent that Victor would insist on seeing me, of all people, from his hospital bed? The hour passed slowly, with Eleanor filling us in on the morning's events. Victor had been meeting with Edward Chamberlain in a private dining room at the Metropolitan Club when he suddenly became pale and disoriented, then slumped in his chair. Chamberlain had immediately called for medical assistance and stayed until the ambulance arrived. Mr. Chamberlain was remarkably kind, Eleanor noted. He called me personally once Victor was on his way to the hospital, explaining everything that happened and offering any assistance we might need. Finally, a nurse appeared to inform us that Victor had been moved to a private room and could receive visitors, family only, 2 at a time. Eleanor immediately insisted that Isabella and I go first. He asked for you specifically, she said firmly. Whatever it is, it must be important. The hospital room was dimly lit, with monitoring equipment quietly tracking Victor's vital signs. He lay propped against white pillows, looking smaller and more vulnerable than I had ever seen him. The commanding presence that had so intimidated me at our first meeting was diminished but not erased. His eyes still held their characteristic sharpness as we entered. "Ah, Isabella. Marcus." His voice was weaker than normal but clear. "Thank you for coming." Isabella moved immediately to his side, taking his hand. "Of course we came. How are you feeling?" "Like a fool," he answered with surprising candor. Collapsing in the middle of a business meeting, not exactly the Harrison way of demonstrating strength. "I think you're allowed a moment of weakness after 70 years of stubborn self-sufficiency," Isabella replied with gentle teasing, relief making her voice tremble slightly. Victor's eyes shifted to me, standing awkwardly at the foot of the bed. "Marcus, we need to talk about the farms." Of all the topics I might have expected, business wasn't high on the list. "That can wait until you're recovered," I assured him. "No, it can't," Victor insisted with a flash of his usual determination. "Chamberlain made an offer this morning, before my unfortunate episode, a very generous offer." Isabella and I exchanged glances. So that was the purpose of the meeting, not just exploration, but an actual acquisition offer. "That's significant news," I managed, unsure how to respond. 15% above market value, Victor continued. "All cash. Immediate closure once the bankruptcy court approves." He paused, watching our reactions carefully. By any objective standard, it's superior to either option AgriFund presented yesterday. The statement hung in the air, its implications clear. If Victor accepted Chamberlain's offer, our chance at acquiring or partnering on the Harrison properties would vanish. "If it's a better offer, you should take it," I said finally, meaning it despite the disappointment that tugged at me. The goal has always been to find the best outcome for the Harrison family and the land itself. Victor studied me with unexpected intensity. That's an unusually gracious response from a competitor who just lost a deal. "This was never about winning or losing for me," I replied honestly. "It was about preserving something valuable in the best way possible. If Chamberlain can do that better than AgriFund, then that's the right outcome." A strange expression crossed Victor's face, something between surprise and what almost looked like respect. "Sit down, both of you," he instructed, gesturing to the chairs beside his bed. "There's something you need to understand about Edward Chamberlain and me." We complied, curiosity overriding our confusion. Victor took a deep breath, seeming to gather his strength for what came next. "Chamberlain and I were roommates at Washington State, agricultural business majors, class of U76, he began. Competitors in everything, grades, campus. Jobs mine even dated the same woman for a while. After graduation, we both applied for an executive training position at Western Agricultural Bank. I got it. He didn't. This history was completely new to Isabella, judging by her surprised expression. Victor had never been one to share stories of his early career, preferring to project the image that he had always been successful, always been in control. "Edward took the rejection hard," Victor continued. "Moved back to his family's small farm operation in Idaho, determined to prove the bank wrong. While I was climbing the corporate ladder, he was expanding that family farm, so acre by acre, property by property." Victor shifted slightly in the bed, wincing as he adjusted the angle. "By the time I left banking to take over the Harrison operations after marrying your mother, Edward had built Chamberlain Agricultural into a regional powerhouse. Our paths would cross occasionally at industry events, always with that old competitive edge between us." "So this offer," Isabella interjected, "it's personal for him. A chance to finally best you in some way. Victor gave a small, rueful smile. That's what I assumed at first. But I was wrong. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. Edward didn't come to gloat or to capitalize on my misfortune. He came with a proposition that surprised me completely. My curiosity was thoroughly piqued now. What kind of proposition? A three-way partnership, Victor answered. Chamberlain Agricultural would provide the capital to clear the bankruptcy obligations. AgriFund would provide the technological implementation and operational expertise. The Harrison family would maintain a meaningful equity stake and consulting role. The proposal was so unexpected that neither Isabella nor I responded immediately. A three-way partnership between former competitors and current adversaries seemed almost fantastical. Why would Chamberlain suggest including AgriFund? I asked finally, struggling to understand the logic. They have more than enough resources and expertise to handle the acquisition themselves. Victor's expression became thoughtful. That was my question exactly. Edward's answer was illuminating. He said, Victor, I've been watching Reynolds and his operation for the past 2 years. What they're doing with medium-sized farms is revolutionary. Exactly the approach the industry needs. I could replicate it eventually. But why reinvent something that's already working? The indirect compliment from a major industry figure was satisfying, but I remained skeptical. Still, a three-way partnership is inherently complex. The governance challenges alone would be significant. Edward addressed that as well, Victor replied. He proposed a clean division of responsibilities. Chamberlain provides capital and market access. AgriFund provides technological systems and implementation. Harrison provides historical knowledge and community relationships. Each partner focused on their strengths. Isabella leaned forward, intrigued despite her initial skepticism. And how would ownership be structured in this arrangement? 50% Chamberlain, 30% AgriFund, 20% Harrison. Victor recited. A meet with clear operational domains and a dispute resolution mechanism that Edward has apparently used successfully in other complex partnerships. It was, on its face, a remarkably balanced proposal, one that would preserve family involvement, implement our technological vision, and provide the capital security of a major agricultural player. Yet something still didn't quite add up. Why tell us this from a hospital bed? I asked directly. This could have waited until you recovered. Victor's expression grew more serious. Because my health episode clarified certain priorities. The doctors have informed me that while this wasn't a heart attack, it was a warning sign of potentially serious cardiac issues. Issues that demand lifestyle changes, stress reduction, and a reevaluation of my priorities. Isabella squeezed his hand. My dad, are you saying? I'm saying that I can't continue fighting battles on multiple fronts, Victor admitted, the words seeming to cost him considerable effort. The stress of the bankruptcy, the potential loss of the family legacy, in the tension with you both. The doctors were quite clear that continuing as I have been could lead to a genuine heart attack, one I might not survive. The vulnerability in his admission was unprecedented. In all the years I had known him, Victor Harrison had never acknowledged weakness or limitation of any kind. Edward's proposal offers a path forward that addresses the business challenges while potentially healing some of the personal rifts, as well, Victor continued. But it depends entirely on whether you, Marcus, and by extension, James and AgriFund, would consider such an arrangement. I sat back, processing the implications. A partnership with both Chamberlain and the Harrisons would be complex but potentially powerful. The combined resources would allow for implementation of our systems on a scale we hadn't previously contemplated, while the Harrison involvement would maintain the family connection that clearly mattered so much to Victor. I would need to discuss this with James, of course, I replied carefully, and see the detailed terms of what Chamberlain is proposing, but conceptually, yes, it's an approach worth exploring. Relief visibly washed over Victor's face. Good. Edward left the preliminary framework with me. He gestured to a leather portfolio on the bedside table. He's scheduled to be in Seattle for the next 3 days and would welcome a meeting with you and James at your earliest convenience. Isabella looked between us, seeming slightly stunned by the turn of events. So after all this conflict, all the harsh words and threats, we might end up as business partners, the 3 most stubborn men I know, working together? Victor actually chuckled, a sound so unexpected in the hospital setting that it momentarily startled us both. Life has a way of arranging ironic outcomes, doesn't it? The son-in-law I dismissed as having no future may end up being key to preserving my past. The acknowledgement, however oblique, of his wedding toast and its lasting impact felt significant. A rare moment of self-awareness from a man who typically admitted no fault. "This isn't just about business for you, is it?" Isabella asked her father directly. "This partnership idea, it's about finding a way forward that allows you to accept Marcus without having to admit you were wrong about him." Victor had the grace to look slightly abashed. Perhaps there's some truth to that observation, though I would frame it differently. It's about recognizing that circumstances and people can evolve in unexpected ways. It wasn't quite an apology or admission of error, but from Victor Harrison, it was remarkable nonetheless. "The partnership has legitimate business merits beyond any personal considerations," I offered, giving him a graceful exit from the uncomfortable moment. "Indeed it does," Victor agreed quickly. "Edward was particularly impressed with your soil moisture management systems, said they were years ahead of what his own teams had developed." Our conversation was interrupted by a nurse arriving to check Victor's vital signs. She informed us that our visiting time was nearly up, and that Eleanor and Richard should have their turn before Victor needed to rest. As we prepared to leave, Victor called me back to his bedside while Isabella stepped into the hallway to update her mother and brother. "Marcus," he said quietly, his voice more serious than before. "There's something else you should know about Edward's proposal. Something I haven't mentioned to Isabella yet." I moved closer, wondering what additional complexity awaited. "What is it?" "The partnership is just the beginning. Edward is 73, with no children or obvious successors. He's been looking for the right leadership to eventually take over Chamberlain Agricultural." Victor held my gaze steadily. "He sees potential in you and your approaches. This partnership would be, in effect, an extended evaluation period for a much larger opportunity." The implication was staggering. Chamberlain Agricultural Holdings was valued at well over $1 billion, with operations across 5 states. The possibility of eventually leading such an enterprise was beyond anything I had contemplated in my career trajectory. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, genuinely puzzled by Victor's apparent support for such a possibility. A complex expression crossed his face, part resignation, part acceptance, perhaps even a touch of pride. "Because despite our differences, you've proven yourself to be a capable businessman and leader. More importantly, you've made my daughter happy and stood by her even when it was difficult." He paused, seeming to choose his next words with unusual care. "I may not have been the father-in-law you deserved, but perhaps I can be the one who helps open doors to opportunities you do deserve." The sentiment, coming from the man who had dismissed my prospects so thoroughly at our wedding, left me momentarily speechless. Before I could formulate a response, the nurse returned more insistently, and I had to leave with Victor's unexpected revelation still resonating in my mind. In the hospital corridor, Isabella was deep in conversation with Richard and Eleanor. I stood apart for a moment, processing everything that had transpired. The potential partnership with Chamberlain and the Harrisons, Victor's health scare and subsequent shift in attitude, and now this hint of a much larger opportunity on the horizon. Life rarely followed expected paths. 4 years ago, standing, humiliated at my own wedding reception, I could never have imagined a scenario where Victor Harrison would not only acknowledge my professional accomplishments, but actively support my advancement. Yet here we were, on the threshold of a business arrangement that might heal family wounds while creating unprecedented opportunities. As Isabella turned toward me, her expression lighter than it had been in months, I made a silent resolution. Whatever came next Whether the partnership succeeded or failed, whether the larger opportunity with Chamberlain materialized or not, I would approach it with integrity, focusing on creating value rather than validating past grievances. Because ultimately, proving Victor Harrison wrong had never been the point. Building something meaningful, something that honored both innovation and tradition, had always been the true goal, even when wounded pride had occasionally obscured that vision. Isabella took my hand as we walked toward the elevator, our future suddenly opening in unexpected directions. "Well," she said with a small smile, "that wasn't exactly how I expected today to unfold. Life rarely follows the script we expect," I replied, squeezing her hand gently. "And sometimes it writes a better one than we could have imagined." Whether the next chapters would fulfill that promise remained to be seen. But for the first time since Victor's cutting words at our wedding, all parties seemed willing to turn the page toward a new narrative, one where old wounds might finally begin to heal. The meeting with Edward Chamberlain took place in AgriFund's conference room 3 days after Victor's hospitalization. I had expected a hard-driving corporate titan, someone cut from the same cloth as Victor but with deeper resources and a wider reach. The man who entered alongside James was something else entirely. Tall and lean, with a weathered face that spoke of decades spent in fields rather than boardrooms, and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Despite being in his 70s, Chamberlain moved with the easy grace of someone 30 years younger. "Marcus Reynolds," he said, extending a hand with calluses no amount of corporate success had erased. "I've been following your work with medium-sized farms for some time. Impressive innovation, particularly your soil moisture management systems." His directness was refreshing after months of tension and veiled meanings with Victor. "Thank you, Mr. Chamberlain. Your interest in our approach is unexpected but appreciated." "Call me Edward," he insisted, settling into a chair. And there's nothing unexpected about it. Smart business recognizes smart business, regardless of scale differences." James joined us, along with our respective legal teams, and for the next 3 hours, we dissected the proposed partnership structure. The framework was more sophisticated than I had anticipated, clearly the product of careful thought rather than a hasty hospital bed inspiration. Each party's responsibilities were delineated with precision. Chamberlain Agricultural would provide capital and market access. AgriFund would implement technological systems and operational oversight. The Harrison family would contribute historical knowledge and community relationships. The ownership split reflects both capital contribution and ongoing value creation, Edward explained. 50% Chamberlain, 30% AgriFund, 20% Harrison, with appropriate protection clauses for all parties. James studied the proposal with his usual thoroughness. The governance structure is particularly intriguing. 3-member executive committee with unanimity required for major decisions. A simple majority for operational matters. "It's a model I've used successfully in other complex partnerships," Edward confirmed. "The key is clearly defining which decisions fall into which category." As the discussion progressed, I found myself increasingly impressed by Edward's business acumen and clarity of vision. Unlike Victor, whose management style relied heavily on tradition and intuition, Edward combined old-school agricultural understanding with modern business sophistication. "There's one aspect we haven't directly addressed," I said during a break, when only Edward, James, and I remained in the room. "The personal dynamics between some of the parties involved." Edward's eyes crinkled with quiet amusement. "You mean the fact that Victor Harrison has spent the past 4 years dismissing you, only to find himself potentially partnering with you out of necessity?" His bluntness startled a laugh from me. "That's a succinct summary. Yes, Victor and I have known each other for nearly 50 years, Edward replied, his tone thoughtful. "Competitors, occasional adversaries, reluctant associates. I understand his pride and his blind spots better than most." He leaned forward slightly. His cardiac event was a wake-up call, Marcus, not just medically, but psychologically. For perhaps the first time, he's facing his own limitations, and the consequences of his stubborn adherence to outdated approaches. That's a significant shift for someone like Victor, James observed. Edward nodded. Indeed. But Victor has another quality that few recognize. When finally confronted with irrefutable evidence, he's capable of course correction. He'd never admit he was wrong, mind you, but he'll adjust his position and move forward as if the new direction had always been his intention. The assessment matched my own observations over the years. Victor's rare moments of flexibility had always been presented as strategic pivots rather than admissions of error. And you believe this partnership can work despite that history? I asked directly. Edward studied me for a moment. That depends largely on you, Marcus. Victor's adjustment is already underway. His medical scare has seen to that. The question is whether you can move past the justified resentment you must feel toward a man who disparaged you so thoroughly and publicly. It was a fair question, one I had been asking myself since the hospital visit. I believe I can, I answered honestly. This isn't about personal vindication for me. It's about creating something valuable for the land, for the agricultural community, and yes, for my family's future. Edward smiled, seemingly satisfied with my response. Good, because there's an aspect of this arrangement that goes beyond the Harrison properties themselves. He outlined what Victor had hinted at in the hospital, that the partnership was potentially a first step toward a larger succession. Plan for Chamberlain Agricultural. Edward had no children or obvious heirs, and at 73 was beginning to contemplate the future leadership of his agricultural empire. I've built something significant, he said without false modesty. But without the right succession plan, it could be dismantled by corporate raiders or investment groups with no understanding of agricultural realities. James leaned forward, intrigued. And you see AgriFund, specifically Marcus. As potential successors, I see potential, Edward emphasized. This partnership would be an opportunity to evaluate that potential in real-world conditions. If successful, we might discuss a more comprehensive arrangement in the future. The magnitude of what he was suggesting, eventual leadership of $1 billion agricultural enterprise, was both exhilarating and somewhat overwhelming, but that was a consideration for the future. Today's focus needed to remain on the partnership itself. When our legal teams returned, we finalized the framework agreement that would guide the more detailed documentation to follow. By late afternoon, we had a signed memorandum of understanding, the first formal step toward what Edward had dubbed Triple Horizon Partnership, after the 3 property parcels that comprised the Harrison Farms. As we concluded the meeting, Edward took me aside for a private word. Victor will be released from the hospital tomorrow. I've arranged a dinner at the Metropolitan Club for all principal parties on Saturday evening. Neutral territory. Appropriate formality. Is Victor up for that so soon after his health scare? I asked, concerned despite our history. Edward's expression softened slightly. The doctors have cleared it, with certain dietary restrictions he'll undoubtedly ignore. But more importantly, Victor needs this, a structured environment, to formalize the new reality without losing face. His understanding of Victor's psychology was impressive. A formal business dinner would allow my father-in-law to approach our new relationship as a strategic alliance rather than a personal reconciliation, preserving his dignity in the process. We'll be there, I promised. That evening, Isabella and I discussed the day's developments over dinner at home. She listened intently as I outlined the partnership structure and Edward's longer-term succession interests. It's remarkable, she observed when I finished. 4 years ago, Dad was dismissing your future prospects at our wedding. Now you're not only acquiring an interest in his farms, but potentially being groomed for leadership of one of the largest agricultural operations in the western United States. Life does have a certain ironic symmetry sometimes, I agreed. Though I'm not counting on the succession aspect yet. That's a separate consideration far in the future. Isabella sipped her wine thoughtfully. What impressed me most about today's call with Edward is how quickly he assessed both the business opportunity and the personal dynamics. He seems to understand Dad better than most people who've known him for decades. They have a long history as competitors, I reminded her. Sometimes your rivals understand your weaknesses more clearly than your friends. True. She set down her glass, her expression growing more serious. Marcus, are you really okay with this? Working closely with my father after everything he's said and done. I wouldn't blame you if part of you was just satisfying a desire to prove him wrong. The question deserved careful consideration. I won't pretend there isn't a certain satisfaction in the reversal, I admitted. But that's not my primary motivation. The partnership makes business sense independently of any personal history, and if it also happens to heal some family wounds along the way, that's a welcome bonus. Isabella reached across the table to take my hand. I'm proud of you. Not everyone could separate personal feelings from professional opportunities this way. I learned from the best, I replied, squeezing her hand gently. You've been navigating the complicated terrain between family loyalty and personal integrity your entire life. The days leading up to Saturday's dinner were filled with preliminary work on the partnership documentation. Our legal team worked closely with Chamberlain's attorneys and the Harrisons' bankruptcy counsel to ensure the arrangement would satisfy the bankruptcy court's requirements while protecting all parties' interests. Richard came to the office twice for operational discussions, bringing detailed maps and historical yield data that would inform our technology implementation plans. His enthusiasm for the partnership was genuine and unrestrained, free from the pride that had hampered his father's embracing of innovation. I've been trying to modernize our irrigation systems for 3 years, he confessed during one session, spreading soil composition maps across our conference table. Dad would approve small upgrades, but resist the comprehensive approach your systems require. I studied the maps with interest. The western parcel has particularly interesting variation. Your grandfather chose well when he acquired that property. Richard looked surprised. You know about my grandfather's expansion? I've researched the history of all 3 parcels. I confirmed. The original homestead, your grandfather's western expansion in the 1950s, and your father's northern addition in the 1980s, each generation adding to the legacy in their own way. Something in my response seemed to reassure Richard, and now our generation will contribute through technology rather than acreage expansion, he observed. Exactly. Different means, same fundamental goal, ensuring the land remains productive and sustainable for future generations. By Saturday evening, when Isabella and I dressed for the partnership dinner at the Metropolitan Club, much of the preliminary work was complete. The bankruptcy court had indicated preliminary approval of the arrangement, contingent on formal documentation. The technological implementation planning was underway, with initial soil sensors scheduled for installation within weeks. Isabella chose a deep blue dress that complemented her dark hair, elegant without being ostentatious. I wore my best suit, still modest by Metropolitan Club standards, but appropriate for the occasion. Nervous? She asked as we pulled into the parking lot. A little, I admitted. This will be the first time your father and I have interacted in a social setting since the hospital. I'm not entirely sure what to expect. Just be yourself, she advised. The self that impressed Edward Chamberlain and built AgriSmart into a success, confident but not arrogant, innovative but respectful of tradition. Her description made me smile. When did you become such a wise counselor? Around the same time you became a potential agricultural magnate, she teased, lightening the moment as we entered the club's imposing entrance. The private dining room was already occupied when we arrived. Edward Chamberlain stood near the window, deep in conversation with James. Eleanor and Richard were seated at the large round table, reviewing what appeared to be menu options. And Victor, looking remarkably recovered despite his recent hospitalization, was examining a framed historical map of Washington state agriculture that hung on the wood-paneled wall. He turned as we entered, his expression unreadable. Isabella, Marcus, thank you for coming. The formality wasn't unexpected, but Isabella immediately crossed the room to embrace him. You're looking better than I expected, she said. studying his face with genuine concern. "Are you following the doctor's orders?" "Mostly," he admitted with a slight smile. "Though their dietary restrictions are appallingly restrictive for a dinner like this." Edward joined us, clapping a friendly hand on Victor's shoulder. "Which is why I've arranged a special menu that satisfies both medical requirements and culinary standards. The chef owes me a favor from considerable patronage over the years." The small gesture of thoughtfulness, accommodating Victor's needs without drawing attention to his limitations, exemplified Edward's diplomatic skills. As we took our seats for dinner, I found myself strategically placed between Edward and Richard, with Isabella across from me beside her father. The arrangement minimized potential tension while maintaining the formality appropriate for a business dinner. The conversation during the first course remained deliberately light. Weather predictions for the growing season, Seattle's cultural events, Richard's recent fishing trip to Montana. By the time the main course arrived, Edward skillfully guided the discussion toward partnership matters. "I believe we've made remarkable progress in a very short time," he observed, raising his water glass. "To the Triple Horizon Partnership, may it prove beneficial to all parties and to the land itself." We joined the toast, even Victor, though he seemed slightly uncomfortable with the ceremonial acknowledgement of the new arrangement. As we continued eating, Edward addressed him directly. "Victor, I've been reviewing the historical yield data from your western parcel. The microclimate advantages there are quite remarkable." It was a masterful opening, acknowledging Victor's domain expertise and the value of his family's legacy. Victor visibly relaxed, launching into a detailed explanation of the western parcel's unique advantages, from soil composition to wind patterns. "My father recognized its potential in 1952, he explained. "Everyone thought he was overpaying, but he understood what that land could produce with the right management." "Visionary," Edward agreed. "Just as Marcus's soil moisture management systems are visionary for today's challenges. Different eras require different innovations, but the fundamental agricultural wisdom remains constant." The parallel was subtle but effective, creating a bridge between Victor's traditional expertise and our technological approaches. Throughout the dinner, Edward continued this diplomatic balancing, acknowledging each party's contributions while fostering a sense of shared purpose. As dessert was served, he addressed the broader implications of our partnership. "What we're creating here has potential significance beyond the Harrison properties themselves," he noted. "Medium-sized agricultural operations across the country face similar challenges, caught between agribusiness conglomerates and small specialty farms, struggling with technological adoption barriers and succession planning." James nodded, in agreement. "Our work with farms in that range has demonstrated both the challenges and the opportunities. With Chamberlain's capital resources and the AgriFund technological approach, we could potentially develop a replicable model." "Precisely," Edward confirmed. "A model that preserves family agricultural legacies while implementing necessary modernization, neither corporate standardization nor boutique specialty farming, but a middle path that maintains scale viability with technological efficiency." Victor had been listening quietly, but now he leaned forward slightly. "You're suggesting this partnership could be replicated with other properties facing similar challenges?" "With appropriate adaptations for local conditions, yes," Edward replied. "The principles are transferable, even if the specific implementations would vary." Victor considered this, then surprised me with his next comment. "Marcus's irrigation systems would be the cornerstone of such an approach. The water management efficiencies alone could make the difference between viability and failure for many operations." It was the first time he had ever acknowledged the value of our technological innovations directly. I kept my expression neutral, but Isabella caught my eye briefly across the table, her surprise mirroring my own. "I believe you're right," Edward agreed smoothly. "Which is why the implementation sequencing we've outlined begins with the soil moisture monitoring systems and precision irrigation components, followed by crop rotation optimization." The conversation continued along technical lines, with Richard asking detailed questions about implementation timelines and Victor occasionally offering insights about specific property characteristics that might affect our technological deployment. By the time coffee was served, something remarkable had occurred. We were discussing the partnership as a collaborative venture rather than a necessary compromise forced by financial circumstances. Victor was still formal, still occasionally guarded, but he was engaging with the plans with genuine interest rather than reluctant acquiescence. As the evening drew to a close, Edward proposed a visit to the Harrison Farms the following week, a walking tour to discuss specific implementation, locations for the initial technology deployment. Victor agreed readily, even suggesting that I join them to identify optimal sensor placement locations. In the car driving home, Isabella finally gave voice to what we had both been thinking. Did that really just happen? Did my father actually suggest you join them for a farm tour and advocate for your irrigation systems? It appears so, I replied, still somewhat amazed myself. Edward has a remarkable talent for creating conversational bridges. It's more than that, Isabella insisted. Dad has actually changed. Not completely. I don't expect heartfelt apologies or emotional confessions anytime soon, but substantively. He's accepting you as a valued partner rather than an unwanted intruder. Her assessment seemed accurate. The change in Victor's attitude wasn't just diplomatic surface courtesy, but a fundamental shift in perspective. His cardiac event had indeed served as a wake-up call, forcing a reevaluation of priorities and positions that had previously seemed immutable. The following weeks brought steady progress on both the partnership documentation and the initial technology implementation. The bankruptcy court formally approved our arrangement, allowing the Triple Horizon Partnership to assume control of the Harrison properties while satisfying all creditor obligations. Our technical teams began installing soil moisture sensors and weather monitoring stations across all 3 parcels, creating the data foundation for the more comprehensive systems to follow. Richard worked alongside our implementation specialists, absorbing the technical details with enthusiasm. Victor participated in weekly progress meetings, gradually becoming more comfortable with the collaboration. He rarely addressed me directly in group settings, maintaining a certain professional distance, but his opposition to our technological approaches had completely disappeared, replaced by cautious interest and occasional insightful questions. 6 months after the partnership formation, on a crisp fall afternoon, I stood with Edward at the edge of the western parcel, watching as our automated irrigation systems activated in different zones based on real-time soil moisture readings. The harvest projections for the coming year showed a potential 35% yield increase with 40% less water usage, precisely the efficiency gains our models had predicted. Impressive, Edward commented, surveying the rolling fields with satisfaction, which the implementation has gone more smoothly than I anticipated. Richard's involvement has been invaluable, I acknowledged. His knowledge of the property's quirks has helped us fine-tune the systems for local conditions. Edward nodded, and then changed the subject slightly. Victor's adjustment has been surprising as well. I expected more resistance, even after his health scare. I think seeing the preliminary results has convinced him in a way that theoretical discussions never could, I suggested. On the first moisture data comparisons between treated and control sections were particularly compelling. True, Edward agreed, but there's something else at work as well. He turned to face me directly. He's been watching you, Marcus. Not just your technology, but your approach. Your willingness to incorporate his historical knowledge rather than dismissing it. Your respect for the land itself beyond mere productivity metrics. The observation was perceptive. I had made a conscious effort to value Victor's experience, integrating his insights into our implementation plans wherever appropriate. The partnership works better that way, I said simply. His knowledge complements our technology rather than competing with it. Edward smiled slightly. And that approach, that integration of tradition and innovation, is precisely why I believe you're the right person to eventually lead Chamberlain Agricultural. The statement, delivered casually against the backdrop of harvest preparation, caught me by surprise. You've been considering this seriously? Increasingly so, he confirmed. The past 6 months have demonstrated not just your technical expertise, which I already knew about, but your leadership qualities. The ability to bridge different perspectives, to respect legacy while driving necessary change. He gestured toward the farmhouse in the distance, where Victor and Richard were reviewing crop rotation plans with our agronomists. Creating a functional partnership with Victor Harrison after years of antagonism is no small achievement. If you can manage that, you can manage the transition of an agricultural empire. The vote of confidence was both flattering and somewhat overwhelming. I appreciate your faith in me, Edward, though I imagine such a transition would be years in the future. Years, yes, but not as many as you might think, he replied. I'm 73, Marcus. While I'm fortunate to still have my health and faculties, I have no intention of being one of those executives who dies at his desk because he couldn't bear to let go. He outlined his preliminary thinking, a 5-year transition plan that would gradually increase AgriFund's role within Chamberlain Agricultural, with me potentially moving into a COO position within 2 years, assuming the partnership continued to prove successful. Nothing needs to be decided immediately, he assured me. Consider it a possibility to contemplate as we continue our current work. As we walked back toward the farmhouse, I found myself reflecting on the extraordinary journey of the past 4 years, from the humiliation of Victor's wedding toast to potentially leading one of the largest agricultural enterprises in the western United States, a path no one, least of all me, could have predicted. That evening, I shared Edward's comments with Isabella as we sat on the back deck of the modest but comfortable house we had purchased the previous year. The sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, a fitting backdrop for discussions of future possibilities. Are you surprised? She asked after hearing Edward's succession thoughts. Completely, I admitted. I understood he saw potential in our technology and approaches, but leadership of his entire operation, that's beyond anything I imagined. Isabella studied me thoughtfully. Are you interested? It would mean significant changes for both of us. More responsibility, more public visibility, potentially even relocating depending on how the role evolves. I'm intrigued by the possibility, I answered honestly. Though, as Edward emphasized, it's a long-term consideration, not an immediate decision point. She nodded, then asked the question that truly mattered. Would it make you happy? Beyond the professional achievement and validation, would the actual work fulfill you? It was the perfect question, cutting through external markers of success to the core of personal satisfaction. I considered it carefully before responding. I believe it would, I said finally. Not because of the scale or prestige, but because it would allow me to implement our agricultural vision more broadly, to help more family farms remain viable through technological innovation while preserving their agricultural heritage. Isabella smiled, seemingly satisfied with my answer. Then we should remain open to the possibility, while focusing on making the current partnership successful. Exactly. One harvest at a time. The phrase reminded me of something Victor had said during a recent implementation meeting, that farmers ultimately measured success not in quarterly reports or 5-year plans, but in the rhythm of planting and harvest, of the annual cycle of stewarding the land through its productive seasons. 2 weeks later, Eleanor invited us to Sunday dinner at the Harrison estate, the first such invitation since the bankruptcy proceedings had begun. The gesture represented another step in the gradual healing of family relationships, parallel to but distinct from our business collaboration. As we drove through the imposing gates, I was struck by how different my feelings were from those early visits as Isabella's new husband. The anxiety and intimidation had been replaced by a quiet confidence, not arrogance, but the self-assurance that comes from having proven one's worth through actions rather than assertions. Eleanor greeted us warmly at the door, embracing Isabella and, somewhat surprisingly, me as well. It's been too long, she said, genuine emotion in her voice. The house has missed your presence. Richard and his wife Anne were already in the living room, cocktails in hand. Victor entered as we were being served drinks, his physical recovery now nearly complete, though he moved somewhat more carefully than before his cardiac event. Isabella. Marcus. His greeting was still formal but lacked the dismissive edge that had once characterized his interactions with me. Thank you for coming. Dinner was served in the formal dining room, just as it had been during those tense monthly meals years earlier. Yet the atmosphere was markedly different, still not entirely relaxed, but free from the undercurrent of hostility that had previously dominated. The conversation flowed more naturally than I had expected, touching on community events, Richard and Anne's plans for a spring vacation, and Eleanor's garden club activities. Victor remained somewhat reserved but contributed occasional observations and even a rare dry joke about his cardiologist's dietary restrictions. It was during dessert, apple pie made with fruit from the Harrison orchards, that Victor surprised us all by addressing the changes directly. I understand the partnership's first quarterly report will be presented next week, he said, looking primarily at Richard, but including me in his glance. Edward mentioned the preliminary. Figures are quite promising. They are, Richard confirmed. But the moisture management systems have already reduced water usage by 22% compared to last year, and the soil nutrient data suggest we'll see yield improvements of at least 15% in the spring crops. Victor nodded thoughtfully. Numbers that would have been difficult to believe a year ago, he acknowledged. Then, turning more directly to me, he added, your technological implementations have proven more effective than anticipated. The acknowledgement, delivered in the same dining room where he had once dismissed our approaches as gadgets and gizmos, represented a remarkable evolution, not an apology for past skepticism, but a clear recognition of current value. The technology is only part of the equation, I replied carefully. Its effectiveness depends heavily on proper implementation, which Richard has managed expertly, and on alignment with the land's particular characteristics, which your historical knowledge has helped us understand. It was a diplomatic response, but also a truthful one. The partnership's early success genuinely had resulted from the combination of our different contributions rather than any single factor. Victor seemed to consider this, then offered what, from him, constituted a significant olive branch. Perhaps next quarter's implementation planning should include more direct consultation between us. There are seasonal patterns in the eastern parcel that might inform your sensor placement strategy. I'd welcome that input, I replied. I was careful to maintain the professional framing he preferred rather than acknowledging the personal significance of his offer of direct collaboration. Isabella caught my eye briefly across the table, her expression conveying what we both recognized. Another small but meaningful step in the gradual transformation of our family relationships. As we prepared to leave later that evening, Victor surprised us once more by walking us to our car, rather than saying goodbye at the door, as had been his habit. The partnership documentation includes naming rights for the integrated operation, he noted as we reached the driveway. Triple Horizon is appropriate for now, but eventually a more permanent identity might be considered. I wasn't entirely sure where he was going with this observation. That would be a decision for all three partners to consider together. I replied neutrally. Victor nodded, then added what seemed like a non sequitur. Isabella mentioned you're expecting a child in the spring. Your first. The news was relatively recent. Isabella was just past her first trimester, and we had only begun sharing the information with family and close friends. Yes, I confirmed, wondering about the connection to naming rights. Due in early May. Victor looked out over the property, the fields now dormant for winter but still emanating the quiet dignity of well-tended agricultural land. Legacy matters in agriculture, he said after a moment. Not just physical assets, but knowledge, values, approaches, each generation building on what came before. The observation seemed to be leading somewhere specific, but Victor's circuitous communication style often required patience. Naming is part of legacy, he continued. The Harrison name has been on these properties for 3 generations. I once thought it essential that it remain so indefinitely. Now I began to understand the thread connecting his seemingly disjointed comments. Your perspective has evolved, I suggested gently. He nodded slowly. The land endures regardless of what we call it. What matters is that it remains productive, well-managed, sustainable. He finally turned to look at me directly. Like your child, my grandchild, represents the next generation that will benefit from these decisions. Whether they eventually carry the Harrison name, the Reynolds name, or something else entirely. They'll inherit the results of what we build now. It was, in his own way, a profound acknowledgement of acceptance, not just of me as a business partner, but as the father of his future grandchild, and thus an inextricable part of the Harrison family legacy. That perspective honors what your father and grandfather built, I replied, recognizing the significance of his shift. Focusing on the land's welfare rather than just the name attached to it. Victor nodded once more, then extended his hand formally. Good night, Marcus. We'll speak further about the Eastern Parcel irrigation plans next week. As Isabella and I drove away, she reached for my hand on the console, squeezing it gently. 4 years ago, I would have said that conversation was impossible, she observed quietly. Dad actually acknowledging you as part of the family legacy, even indirectly. People can change, I reflected. Not easily, not quickly. And rarely completely, but meaningfully, when circumstances demand it. And when pride finally gives way to wisdom, she added. The following spring brought multiple new beginnings. Our daughter, Catherine Eleanor Reynolds, was born on a perfect May morning, healthy and strong with Isabella's dark hair and what everyone insisted were my eyes. Victor and Eleanor arrived, at the hospital with uncharacteristic promptness, bearing flowers in a small, clearly antique silver rattle that had apparently been a Harrison family tradition for newborns. As Victor somewhat awkwardly held his granddaughter for the first time, I saw something in his expression I had never witnessed before, a softening that went beyond his post-cardiac event adjustments, a genuine emotional openness that acknowledged human connection above status or pride. She has good hands, he observed unexpectedly, gently touching Catherine's tiny fingers. Farmer's hands. The observation, delivered with something approaching tenderness from a man who rarely displayed such emotions, affected me more deeply than I had anticipated. Not because I had any particular expectation that our daughter would follow an agricultural path, but because it represented Victor's ultimate acceptance, seeing his granddaughter as a potential continuation of what he valued most, regardless of her paternal lineage. That same month, the Triple Horizon Partnership presented its first full seasonal results to the bankruptcy court, demonstrating yield improvements and operational efficiencies that exceeded even our optimistic projections. The court formally recognized the partnership's success in preserving the property's agricultural use while satisfying all creditor obligations, the final legal hurdle in our unusual arrangement. Edward hosted a small celebration dinner, raising a toast to successful first harvests, whether of crops or collaborations. The phrasing was deliberate, acknowledging both the agricultural achievements and the less tangible but equally significant harvest of transformed relationships. By summer, Edward had formalized his succession intentions, presenting a structured 5-year plan that would gradually integrate AgriFund's operations with Chamberlain Agricultural, with me transitioning to COO within 2 years and potential CEO within 5 ICARD assuming continued successful collaboration. Nothing in business is guaranteed, he cautioned during our private discussion of the plan. But intentional transitions are always preferable to reactive ones. My father failed to plan his succession, creating chaos when he passed unexpectedly. I won't repeat that mistake. The opportunity was extraordinary, far beyond anything I could have imagined when starting as a simple operations manager at Agritech Solutions years earlier. Yet what struck me most powerfully was that the professional achievement now felt secondary to the personal growth and relationships that had developed along the way. One evening in late September, I found myself walking the western parcel, alone at sunset, inspecting the newly installed advanced irrigation systems that would further reduce water usage while maintaining optimal soil moisture levels. The technology was impressively precise, but what moved me most was the land itself, the gentle rolling contours, the rich soil, the quiet dignity of well-tended agricultural space. A vehicle approached behind me, Victor's truck. I realized as it drew closer. He had been reviewing crop rotation plans with Richard at the main office and was presumably heading home. Instead, he stopped and climbed out, walking over to join me at the field's edge. "New sensors working properly?" he asked, nodding toward the recently installed equipment. "Perfectly," I confirmed. "The data resolution is significantly improved from the first generation." We stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching as the irrigation system activated in precisely targeted sections based on real-time moisture readings. "You know," Victor said finally, "at your wedding, when I said you had no future." He paused, clearly uncomfortable with direct reference to that painful moment, but continuing nonetheless. "I was evaluating you by standards that were becoming obsolete without my realizing it." It was the closest he had ever come to acknowledging the wrongness of his initial judgment, delivered not as an apology, but as an observation about his own limited perspective. Traditional markers of agricultural success were changing, I offered, giving him space to express his thoughts without forcing a direct admission of error. He nodded, grateful for the framing. "Exactly. Land. Ownership, family name, conventional approaches, those were the measures I understood. Technology, innovation, adaptation, those were just words in agricultural journals, not real pathways to success." The sun was setting behind the western hills, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and deep purples. The automated sensors detected the changing light levels, adjusting their monitoring patterns accordingly. "Different eras required different approaches," I observed. "Your grandfather's methods were revolutionary for his time, just as your father's expansion strategies were for his, and your operational efficiencies were for yours. And your technological integration is for this era," Victor completed the thought. "Each generation building on what came before while adapting to new realities." It was perhaps the most profound conversation we had ever shared, an acknowledgement of continuity and change, tradition and innovation, not as opposing forces, but as complementary elements in the long story of agricultural stewardship. As we walked back toward our vehicles, Victor paused, looking out over the land that had defined so much of his identity. "Catherine will know this place," he said suddenly, "not just as history or abstract legacy, but as living, productive agricultural space. Eleanor and I would like to be part of ensuring that. We'd welcome that involvement," I assured him, understanding the deeper request beneath his statement, the desire to pass something meaningful to the next generation, to maintain connection despite the changes in ownership and approach. He nodded once, satisfied with the response, then changed the subject to the more comfortable territory of the upcoming harvest projections. But something significant had been acknowledged between us. Not friendship exactly, perhaps never, but a mutual respect and recognition of shared purpose that transcended our difficult history. That night, as Isabella and I sat on our back porch, Catherine sleeping peacefully in her nursery, I recounted the conversation with her father. "It's remarkable," she observed, "not just that he's accepted you professionally, but that he's found a way to integrate what you represent into his understanding of agricultural continuity." "It's been a long journey from that wedding toast," I agreed. "For all of us." Isabella leaned her head against my shoulder, watching as the last colors of sunset faded from the sky. "Do you remember what you told me that night, after Dad's speech? You said, 'We're a team now, and teams can face any challenge.'" I smiled at the memory. I was terrified but trying to sound confident. "Well, you were right," she said softly. "We faced the challenges, professional, financial, familial, and found a path forward that honors both innovation and tradition. That's no small achievement." As darkness settled around us, I thought about all that had unfolded since. That painful wedding reception, the building of AgriSmart, the creation of AgriFund, the Harrison Farms crisis, the unexpected partnership with Chamberlain, and now the possibility of leading an agricultural enterprise that could influence farming practices across multiple states. None of it had followed the script I might have written for myself. The path had been more difficult, more complex, and ultimately more rewarding than any I could have imagined when standing humiliated at my own wedding reception 4 years earlier. Victor's cutting words that night, "Never seen a promising future for you," had once been a source of deep hurt and resentment. Now they seemed like the opening line of a story neither of us could have anticipated. A story of transformation, growth, and unexpected collaboration. The man who had once dismissed my prospects was now entrusting me with his family's legacy and acknowledging me as part of his own. As Catherine's soft cries came through the baby monitor, Isabella rose to tend to our daughter. I remained on the porch a moment longer, contemplating the fields visible in the distance under the rising moon. The past 4 years had taught me something profound. True success wasn't measured in acquisitions, innovations, or even vindication of past slights. It was found in creating something enduring, systems that honored the land, relationships that bridged divides, and a legacy worth passing to the next generation. When I finally joined Isabella in the nursery, watching as she gently rocked our daughter back to sleep, I felt a deep contentment that transcended professional achievements. In building something meaningful for Catherine's future, I had found something I hadn't even known I was seeking. Not just proof that Victor Harrison had been wrong about me, but the wisdom to understand that being right had never been the point. The future stretched before us now, full of promise and possibility, a future far richer and more complex than the one I had once defended on my wedding night. And while that future would undoubtedly hold new challenges, I faced them with the confidence of someone who had already weathered significant storms and emerged stronger for the experience. After all, as farmers have known for generations, it's the most bountiful harvests often come after the most difficult seasons.